By now, it's no secret that Pokemon has had a, shall we say, a rocky transition into the third dimension. It's been a few years, we're allowed to say that now, right? The newest games in the franchise, Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet, have ended up being fairly serviceable Pokemon entries in their franchise, and a near definitive improvement over Pokemon Sword and Shield. As in, they look like Xbox 360 games instead of PS2 games, so you know, it's a start. All jokes aside, these games do look pretty good and are a proper evolution for the franchise. Not perfect, but good nonetheless. Okay, hi. I'm in the editing room right now. Sorry to make a cut so quickly. I wrote the script pre-release of Scarlet and Violet, and I don't think the games look as good as I kind of made them out to be here. So I'm not some blind Pokemon fan, I promise. This is just me being baited by the trailers and stuff. So just keep that in mind. Okay, enjoy the video. The most important change between Generation 9 and Generation 8 of Pokemon is that the newest games are a lot more open world, as opposed to Sword and Shield, which did have an open wild area that some liked, but lots considered to be underwhelming with lots of graphical issues. So I'm glad 2022's Pokemon game is pushing the franchise forward, and
You're forgetting that Scarlet and Violet isn't the only 2022 Pokemon game.
wait, what are you talking about?
Pokemon Legends Arceus, idiot!
Pokemon Legends wait, that was this year, oh my god!
Yeah, it feels like it was shoved under the rug, but a lot of improvements from Scarlet and Violet come from that game.
It's really interesting to me that all the eyes are on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but 2022 did have another mainline Pokemon game, and yes, it was considered mainline by Game Freak. So I think it's important that we check this out and document it before it's ultimately lost to time. But you're helping me with this one. I can't do this one alone.
Well, I'd like to, but as you can see, this door is wide open, and I don't really want to leave it hanging, so bye.
Before we talk about Pokemon Legends Arceus, I think it's only fair we look at the state of the franchise leading up to the game. It all began with Pokemon Red and Green back
Jeff, the series is 30 years old. We don't have time for this.
Fine, you're not getting my 30-minute rant Pokemon channel then. So who's the loser now? The 3D era of Pokemon, at the very least, began in 2013 with Pokemon X and Y for the Nintendo 3DS. At the time, it was the expected progression to abandon the sprites that had been seen and improved upon throughout the Game Boy and DS eras. Generation 6 was sort of the growing pains generation for the franchise. It was received fine enough, because it's Pokemon for one, although it's debatably the most forgettable Pokemon generation, as X and Y wouldn't even receive a sequel game, which was unprecedented at the time. Pokemon Sun and Moon would release in 2016 to start the 7th generation, followed by Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon the next year. What is important to note though is that during the 3DS generations is the fact that the Pokemon team introduced a few, shall we say, changes that would continue to impact the series well into the Switch era, which is why I'm taking the time to even talk about these games. Trust me, we're going somewhere with this. We're not just rambling here. You know, who would do that in their video? Basically, instead of the team drawing the sprites like they did for the DS games, they would create a database of 3D Pokemon models that they would be able to transfer between not only the games inside of the generations, but future generations, including the Switch era. Pokemon is a yearly franchise after all, and it's a lot easier to change a sprite every year than it is to make brand new 3D models, so they had to cut some corners. Maybe the franchise shouldn't be yearly, huh? In a sense, it was their future-proof plan. Now that Pokemon games were coming out on top-of-the-line consoles, middle-of-the-line consoles, they needed to make this change in order to continue their yearly releases. There's an anime, there's merch, there's trading cards. It's like dominoes. If a game misses its deadline, the whole franchise falls apart. During this time period, however, fans began to notice that Game Freak's optimization skills for the Pokemon games were... yeah, sure, we can extend them some leeway since it was the 3DS after all. The 3 stood for how many pixels were on screen at one time. But it was a bit suspect in my opinion when you consider there were many 3DS games that weren't even RPGs that ran just a bit better. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not like the Pokemon 3DS games are unplayable or anything, and 99% of the time the games ran fine. But at times, like when they introduced new features such as Pokemon Swarms or special animations, yeah, it didn't run that well, which is pretty embarrassing for a company of their budget. Well, at first you might just say it's because of the handheld. This unfortunately would turn out to be some rather dangerous foreshadowing, because if Game Freak couldn't get their games running 100% perfect on the goddamn 3DS, how the hell were they going to be able to adapt their games on the Switch? It can't be that bad though, right? right? Oh god, please someone say something.
Pokemon's rough transition into a home console series has been interesting to say the least and extremely mixed to say the most. As soon as the Nintendo Switch was revealed, people knew that the 3DS's days were numbered, and it would only be a matter of time before Pokemon was forced to make the leap into becoming a proper home console RPG. Expectations were through the roof on what they could achieve once the Pokemon franchise finally struck this hybrid console. They even officially teased that Pokemon would be getting a mainline installment on the Switch during Nintendo's 2017 E3 presentation, with probably the most casual announcement of all time.
Game Freak has begun developing a core RPG Pokemon title on Nintendo Switch.
Like seriously, even Prime 4 had a logo. Oh my god! Before it had nothing. Prime 4 is screwed, isn't it? The announcement spiked both excitement and curiosity among the Pokemon fanbase. What new heights could this franchise reach? Could we finally see a fully HD, breathtaking 3D world? Could we potentially see the adaptation of real-time Pokemon battles instead of the turn-based ones the series has had for 3 decades? Could we finally get the Pokemon open world game the fans have always memed about and secretly hoped would happen? Well, the first Pokemon adventure on the Switch, and our first taste of disappointment, was 2018's Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Where it was technically Pokken Tournament DX in 2017, but that doesn't count since it's the fighting game spinoff, and you probably forgot it was even released. Anyway, the Let's Go games were a more traditional Pokemon affair, but dumbed down and simplified for a younger audience. Adding Pokemon Go style catching, putting less emphasis on battling and more on catching in general, and also adding in a 2-player couch co-op mode, which is actually a pretty novel feature. The response to this one is fairly negative from fans, at least at first. I for one was very disappointed by the announcement. The simplified gameplay elements combined with the tacked on game mechanics got a lot of criticism in particular. The difficulty was severely lowered with the inclusion of forced XP share, which only got worse with co-op enabled. The game also completely removed wild battles, with the pseudo Pokemon Go catching being the majority of the gameplay, meaning that all you got to do was just catch Pokemon most of the time, which kind of feels like a letdown since the traditional gameplay loop felt really artificial. Another main point of contention were the graphics, which didn't look bad, but many fans thought it essentially looked the same as the 3DS titles, but upscaled for the Switch. I do agree with most of the criticisms for this game, but in hindsight, I don't really have much malice towards this entry. It's clearly just meant to be an entry point for new players and something for casual fans to enjoy. It was never really meant to be that grand in scope or anything, so I think it makes more sense that the graphics would still be fairly simple. It even brought in some nice improvements like being able to see the wild Pokemon before you approach them, removing the randomized battle encounters, which was a nice quality of life improvement. And there's also the Pokeball Plus. It looks pretty cool. What do you mean it's $50? It's really just meant to be a little game to set the framework for what Pokemon is for anyone that hadn't played it to this point. So in that regard, this game is alright, although $60 for what is essentially a demo of what Pokemon can be is pretty damn steep. Despite that entry, there was still hope for a proper core mainline Pokemon RPG on consoles. I guess Game Freak said that Let's Go is a core title, but they also probably consider Pokemon Channel to be a core title too, so screw them. Since the fans knew that the year after we would get the new generation. The first Pokemon game on a new console isn't usually some insane showcase anyway. They need time to figure out the capabilities of the hardware in order to make the experience worthwhile for the time. But with this being the first ever home console entry in the series, the weight comes with big expectations. In an interview published on Eurogamer in 2018, higher-ups at Game Freak were asked about the prospect of Pokemon going open world in the future, and he replied with,
"Well, in general, I always want to be kind of facing new challenges and trying to do new things with Pokemon. It's a different matter whether players will actually enjoy that kind of playstyle. Things like setting up an AI so that real-world Pokemon appear, or different ways to appreciate the game. I'm always kind of thinking how to approach the Pokemon series from a different aspect, so, in that sense, it's still on the cards."
By this point, we've had Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, and Smash Bros. Ultimate, games that were arguably considered to be the best entries in their respective franchises, and showcase that the Switch era seek to surpass expectations and deliver the best that each franchise had to offer. So with that logic carrying the console toward the end of year 3 of its existence, so there was reason to assume that the new Pokemon generation, logically, was going to shine bright, and usher in a new defining era for this tired franchise. I don't think there's been a more polarizing moment in the Switch's history than discussion around Generation 8 of Pokemon. To say that this game was divisive would be a massive understatement. The culture war this game cultivated on social media still continues to this very day. Now, this game has been a dead horse for a while now, and I could literally go on forever with the issues that plague this game, so I will be as brief as I can with this part. But in almost every single way, this game was seen as a downgrade for the series at hand. Poor graphics that look directly lifted from the 3DS, a borderline non-existent story that was painfully predictable and helped showcase how much a lack of voice acting in Pokemon really ruins the presentation. The gameplay loop of being free to explore an environment that passively guided you to each new town from the older games has finally been completely scrubbed out after the previous 2 generations forced a more linear design choice. So what we are left with is a tutorial system so hand-holdy and linear it makes Pokemon Snap look like an open-ended game. And the route system that used to feel like an open world and encourage some light exploration are now literal straight lines that circle around the wild area. So now exploration is basically completely gone, and the new routes now suck. The new rival to game, Hop, is barely even a rival since he can barely even pretend to not be your best friend throughout the whole game. Not to mention that it isn't an exaggeration to say he was literally copy and pasted from the previous generation. Then they added another barely disguised Mega Evolution that was created purely so that they can say they added a new gameplay element in trailers, all combining to form the beginning to probably the biggest PR disaster I've seen in the gaming industry since the Battlefield 2 loot box incident. Oh, it was a defining era for the franchise, alright. This game made fans very angry. This was supposed to be a big moment for the franchise. The time when Pokemon went from this cute little handheld RPG to a proper beefy console quality experience. But the first home console Pokemon game ended up being an undeniable rush job that took several steps back. Sure, some parts of the game were good, like the fleshed out character customization, the new Pokemon camp mechanic, and the wild area, which at least conceptually was a fine addition. Having this giant area to walk around in and catch Pokemon at your leisure without having to deal with the random nature of the tall grass sounded like a pretty substantial grab for the franchise. But it was plagued with so many performance issues and horrible pop-in. And the weather system was extremely poorly implemented and disoriented the player above anything else. And you know what the worst part is? You can't use the Pokeball Plus in this game! What a great use of $50! Reggie, what do you have to say about this?
You can put a Pokemon into the Pokeball Plus, then bring it with you. I'm gonna kick your ass.
This game admittedly has its fans, but a lot of people in the fanbase decided that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company had gone way too far this time, and they wanted some serious changes with the treatment of this franchise. And they made sure that their voices were heard and that Game Freak knew that they had messed up big time. And yeah, I think they heard.
After an underwhelming, no, I'm being a little too nice here, how do I word this? Complete f***ing trash past few years on the console, Pokemon fans were living in constant fear, because we all knew Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl remakes were coming based on the previous generational patterns, and it was clear that the Pokemon team standards were slipping down the tubes. Considering how beloved Gen 4 is, man, that's some rough timing. But hey, the Pokemon remakes were always decent up to this point. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green were great, but Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver were some of the, if not the best, Pokemon titles ever released. So much content, and the, shall I say, Heart Gold standard for what a remake of any game, Pokemon or not, should meet. The 3rd generation remakes, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, I personally disliked at the time when they were released, but looking back, I don't think they were too bad. And unfortunately, that's only because when Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl released, it made me realize I took them for granted, and yeah, you can see where I'm going with this. Like, alright, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl as games are fine, they turn on, it's functional, sort of. It's, you know, it's Pokemon. It's not inherently a bad game, but more so a bad remake. These games released in holiday 2021, but oddly enough, this time not being developed by Game Freak, but outsourced to a company named Ilka. Ilsa? The only other Pokemon game they worked on prior was Pokemon Home, and that was all their Pokemon experience. That's not a good sign. I don't know about these games, guys. In my opinion, at least, to start, the graphics were pretty underwhelming. This looks like a WiiWare game. I would argue that Pokemon Coliseum was more impressive for the time, personally, but graphics are graphics. That's not the main problem. My personal issues stem from the fact that gameplay-wise, there's some severe problems at play here. Now, instead of having the option for it, there's a forced EXP share. This is a problem since the original game was not designed around that, and they did not adjust the levels properly of the gym leaders and stuff, meaning you're always going to be over leveled. To make matters worse, they didn't take anything from Pokemon Platinum, like this clown of a fire type gym leader who had basically no fire type Pokemon in Diamond and Pearl. They actually did give him some then in Platinum, which is a great correction. And then BDSP thinks it's really called BDSP. And then BDSP thinks it's being a cute remake by being tile for tile. Like, oh, we're just trying to be faithful. My ass, you're just trying to be lazy. Don't lie to us. I could talk for hours about these games, and in fact, maybe one day I will. But in essence, if you want a way to play Gen 4, and there are really no other ways you can legally do it. BDSP definitely, yeah. And in short, there is a good Diamond and Pearl remake out there at the very least. It's just under the name Pokemon Platinum. While BDSP was not that great, the nostalgia and love for the Generation 4 era thankfully was not set to die there. Otherwise, I might have gone into a coma. Earlier that same year, a completely new game titled Pokemon Legends Arceus was revealed in February 2022 in the Pokemon Direct. The Pokemon Presents, totally different. This was an all-new Pokemon gaming experience, kind of mainline, kind of not, although officially mainline, and took place in none other than the ancient region of Hisui, which is basically the Sinnoh region before it was formally founded. It was clear from the trailers that the focus was more on catching and researching Pokemon rather than the sheer battling, and very obviously was supposed to be an evolution for the franchise. Many considered this the Breath of the Wild moment, and the innovations were seamless. No longer were the days of stopping dead in your tracks to catch a Pokemon a thing. Instead, it gave the franchise action elements, such as real-time catching, showing a really interesting and evolutionary step forward for this kind of stale franchise. Even some of the smaller things were completely different. The 3 starters weren't new Pokemon, but they also weren't nostalgia bait and were unique picks, being Cyndaquil from Generation 2, Oshawott from Generation 5, and Rowlet from Generation 7. Conspiracy theory time. So my theory with Generation 4 remakes is that Pokemon Legends Arceus is what they started when they made a Generation 4 remake, because they might have just gotten too ambitious with it. Game Freak probably decided it wouldn't sell that well or wouldn't be considered faithful remakes, so what they probably decided to do was keep development on this game going as its own game and outsource Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl to Ilka. I have no proof to back that up. It's kind of just something I've thought about, although there is kind of like a bedroom imagery that would have been in the original Diamond and Pearl potentially. I'll put that right here. So that might be the only slight bit of evidence. And if that's true, I would actually have a lot more of leniency for Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl at that point. But we have no proof, so I'm just gonna stay mad.
One aspect of the game's reveal that I find extremely interesting is how there's only one version of this game. I know this might sound like a mute point, but for the Pokemon series, this is kind of a big deal. Game Freak has made it apparent that the game is indeed a core Pokemon game and not a spin-off. They are serious about this game being an experimental new direction for Pokemon as a series. There only being one version of this game is a shocking move, considering how much of a cash cow Pokemon has been. And having 2 separate versions is a huge part of that. With previous games, releasing 2 versions of the same game with slight variations was a way to encourage trading and also made it great gift material for siblings. It required minimal development time, and the fact that there was content gated behind a separate version meant that even hardcore fans might be tempted to double dip. It also meant that each version of Pokemon sold an absolutely stupid amount of copies, since they combined both games on sales reports, meaning that even the worst games in the franchise can easily sell over 10 million copies regardless. The point I'm trying to make at the end of the day is that Arceus only being one version means that the sales numbers required to have this beat normal Pokemon releases are way harder to achieve, and says a lot about Game Freak's expectations of this game. If it's going to be the bold new core AAA direction for this stale series, it's going to need to be proven in the numbers. Just to make the challenge even more difficult, it's going up against the Diamond and Pearl remakes, which will release during the holiday season and were 2 separate versions as per usual. Legends released in late January, meaning it won't have the same holiday crowd, which almost makes me suspicious that the Pokemon company doesn't want this game to be a huge smash hit, so they're trying everything in order to stop its potential growth.
I don't usually do this in my videos these days, but I'd like to take a minute to talk about why we're making this video. With Pokemon Scarlet and Violet being more of a return to the past few generations and less like Pokemon Legends Arceus, Ninja and I viewed it necessary to sort of document PLA. After all, is Legends Arceus just gonna be a one-off, or is this gonna be something the likes of the remakes that get shuffled in with the new generations? Well, the answer is literally no one knows, but I don't want it to be forgotten. Primary problem I have is I can't simply just forget this game exists and move on, because while some of the features were actually integrated in Scarlet and Violet, not all of them were, and in my opinion, that's super frustrating. The purpose of this review is not to talk bad about Generation 9, but more so review and explain why we love what PLA did, and specifically mention what we wish transferred over to Scarlet and Violet. And one last thing before we really get into this video, I'm gonna add a bit of a referendum here and say that most of this script was finished before Scarlet and Violet released. This is a 2-hour video after all. A lot of our information was based on the trailers, the Pokemon Directs, and what's been reported, instead of having a chance to really sit down and play the actual game. The video is not intended to be a Scarlet and Violet review though, and instead a Legends Arceus retrospective that ties it into what we want out of the Pokemon franchise and what we wish was in Scarlet and Violet, but also just the future of the franchise. So with that explanation that I'm sure will mean not a single Pokemon fan gets mad at me for this video, let's take a look at what Game Freak offered us that fateful January 2022. Starting the game, we're looking at a light in the middle of nowhere. God damn it, this is just Breath of the Wild. Yeah, Yeah, let's get this out of the way right now. Pokemon Legends Arceus is, very inspired by Breath of the Wild. When the game was revealed, that was the immediate comparison by many. The comparison even continues in the same story, as we wake up on the beach just like Link wakes up in a sleeping chamber. And yeah, once you get to the actual fields and stuff, it's pretty clear what they were inspired by. I guess the Nintendo ninjas can't sue this one, since, you know, they own both teams. Which presents the question, can you sue yourself? If anyone was to try it, it would definitely be Nintendo. Here on Prelude Beach, yes, that's actually what they called it. I'm gonna smile and pretend that's normal. We wake up to Professor Laventon. Wait a minute, I've seen this guy somewhere before.
Oh, blast and bother! My darling Pokemon, why must you run from me again?
And this guy's from the Galar region, which is based off of England. Well, basically, Professor Laventon tells us we fell out of the sky. Gee, cool, it just must be another Tuesday for you, right? And he's so nonchalant about it. I think if I saw someone fall out of the sky, I would have a goddamn crisis and sell all my stocks. Well, Professor Laventon takes us to the local village named Jubilife. Clearly a reference to Jubilife City from Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, but you know, duh. We meet our rival character here, who is kind of a jerk to us. Can I have some goddamn sympathy, please? Damn, I just fell from a void in the sky. My back still hurts, and it's some freaking almond milk or something. From here, we meet the city's commanders, and my goodness, there are a lot of them, named the Galaxy Team Survey Corps. This is clearly supposed to be a reference to Team Galactic, the villain team of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. The captain, Silene, is very clearly based off of Cyrus, the head honcho of Team Galactic in the old games. But hey, here they're helping us to get back on our feet. We even got a room. You know what, with the cost of rent these days, you'd also help Evil to get a free place to stay. Don't pretend like you're above this, okay?
Jesse!
JeffCompass, I'm also here.
Wait, what about me?
I find it funny that your character's shoes just disappear when running back and forth. That's a miracle technology right there. I wish I had that. You're telling me this game takes place thousands of years ago? Our stay isn't entirely free though, as we're tasked with doing trials for the Galaxy Survey Corps, because our character is apparently super talented at catching Pokemon, based off of us catching 3 level 5 Pokemon earlier. Okay, I don't think I'm good, I think you guys just suck. Why is it that 10-year-olds run the world in the Pokemon universe? Never mind all these old who stand around and tell us what to do. I caught a Bidoof, haha! Well, this does actually have an explanation this time around. The idea is, since we're from the future, as in when Generation 4 took place, we're experts on the art of catching and raising Pokemon. Since this is an ancient civilization, this isn't as commonplace here, so it does make some sense, but it's still funny seeing a kid call the shots over an entire city. Brief note, in my playthrough, I decided to name my Pokemon off of videos I had made throughout 2022, so keep your eyes open for that. I named my starter Maxwell off of Scribble Nuts. That's why most of you are here, so yeah, I had to. I do like how the starters here are from different generations, as I said earlier, and they chose 3 really good ones in my opinion. And thank you for the Gen 5 representation. We need more of that, man. I'm shocked they didn't throw a Gen 1 Pokemon in our face for the 1000th time. A game without Charizard? Zoinks, will it ever sell? A lot of the Pokemon in this game are from non-Kanto regions, which really helps this game to feel fresh. Couldn't resist leaving out Pikachu, but it's okay, because Pikachu's so cute. From here, the main gameplay objective is completing tasks for our village. Hisui is split up into 5 areas where we're tasked with meeting divine beasts, the noble Pokemon, to tame them. In between areas, you also have to increase your trainer rank by catching Pokemon and filling out your Pokedex, which for those unacquainted with the franchise, the Pokedex is basically an encyclopedia of Pokemon species, and we'll talk about that a bit more as the video goes on. Point being, catching Pokemon is a huge part of the game, arguably just as important as the story, and it's clear from the get-go that this game doesn't want you to ignore it. Bottom line, be sure to focus on catching Pokemon while you're playing and level up your trainer rank, or else Silene will yell at you. Well, fine, I didn't want to go to the next area anyways. Come here, you stupid-ass Pidgey wannabe. The ranking system takes a lot of variables into account. It's not just about fulfilling Pokédex entries, as it gives you points for seeing a new Pokemon period, and even catching repeat Pokemon, and things like fulfilling the research tasks as well. You guys ever have that one teacher that would give you extra credit for everything just so you'd pass their test? This is a true story. I actually had an English teacher in high school that gave us points if we literally wrote our name down. It's kind of what Laventon is doing here. You're like, hey man, I caught 10 Bidoofs. I'm sure this is really helpful to our... See what I mean? By upgrading your research rank, you also get more money. Pokemon of a higher level will also listen to you, and your trainer also unlocks the different types of Pokeballs this game has to offer in terms of, you know, catching the Pokemon. Overall, I love that the Pokeballs in this game are designed to be used in the field and not necessarily the battles. While it's a simplified change compared to having like 100 types of Pokeballs, I personally welcome it. I think it's nice not to have to worry about arbitrary Pokeballs. Like, stop taking up room in my unlimited storage space. I also really love how they look. Considering this game takes place in ancient ancient times, they are designed to be a lot more wooden based.
Well, you have these giant open areas in the marketing campaign. It's Pokemon, but open and exploratory. How would the typical gameplay loop even function in this kind of environment? They can't really make routes when the game isn't linear. Well, Game Freak obviously realizing that stopping every second to battle every single Pokemon you see would be very repetitive and inhibit your ability to explore the world around you, so they knew that changes had to be made. Well, this game introduces a mechanic that is equally as groundbreaking as it is fun to utilize: the dodge roll. This one change might sound very one note, like, yeah, they added a dodge button, so what? Well, think about it. When this game was officially revealed in a Pokemon Presents from mid-2021, the first bit of gameplay that we saw was the elusive dodge roll. It said everything they needed to convey about this new style of Pokemon gameplay. Well, that and Game Freak still can't optimize any game to save their lives. You want some stupid brat running away from home to catch Pokemon in the comfort of the government-regulated routes. You are now out in the cold, brutal world and need to fend for yourself. Some might even call it a wild area. No, it's not, and you should be ashamed for thinking that. Don't ever use that kind of language towards me ever again. This is very much the case in the actual game itself, with the brand new real-time catching mechanic. Have you ever been exploring the Pokemon world and wanted to catch a Pokemon, but then you realize in order to do that, you need to engage in a several-minute turn-based fight, then spam the Pokeball button until you somehow manage to RNG your way into catching one? Don't you hate that feeling you get once you exit the battle and then you realize that's going to be the next 20 hours of your playthrough? Well, Legends Arceus does away with all of that garbage. In this game, if you want to catch a Pokemon, you simply aim and throw one of your Pokeballs directly at the opposing Pokemon and it will be caught in literal seconds. Now, instead of catching Pokemon at a snail's pace, you can clear out a whole field of Bidoof in mere minutes. This doesn't make catching automatic by any means. You still need to be able to aim your Pokeball and manually hit the Pokemon in order for it to count. And the aiming isn't particularly generous. It requires some practice to get used to how to properly judge how to arc the Pokeball in order to catch faraway Pokemon. This doesn't resemble the old school RPG as much as it does a third-person shooter, which is kind of humorous. This comparison also goes further than the inclusion of the dodge roll, since you can also enable gyro controls in the menu in order to gain better control over your throws, which is something I was very thankful for. You will feel pretty damn satisfied with some of the throws you'll be able to make. And this makes catching Pokemon even more intuitive than it was previously. The gameplay loop is far more satisfying in my opinion, since the moment-by-moment gameplay has been significantly improved. In order to encourage this mass incarceration of the wildlife, the game mostly just gives you a vague story waypoint a while away, so you're encouraged to slowly go towards that while catching and fighting as much Pokemon as possible, which naturally means you're going to get lost exploring the whole area trying to find Pokemon. Alright, with the advent of this new catching system, you go through a lot of Pokeballs. Whether it be from how many Pokemon you'll catch, or because you have horrible aim, it's okay to admit it. Does this mean you have to go to a Pokemon Center and buy Pokeballs and every items en masse? That would be completely illogical and ruin the flow of the gameplay. I mean, imagine if like that Scarlet and Violet game that just released did something like that. Well, no, since this game does the open world game design of all time: crafting. You see, instead of fighting every trainers and wild Pokemon to get Pokédollars like in the original, this is ancient Sinnoh, and catching Pokemon is still a new concept, so you're on your own. And early on in this game, you will receive a crafting kit. And there are resources you can collect by throwing one of your Pokemon in your party at several objects in the world, and they will appear and extract the materials for you. They also made the icon look like a Pokeball when you're throwing your Pokemon out, which I think is extremely cute, so I had to mention it. There are many objects that contain extractable materials, whether they be trees of apricorns or various type of berries, or the giant crystals that appear with 3 separate colors, which will give you various types of tumblestones. There are occasionally piles of hay and ever such piles that contain items, so you'll need to keep a lookout. Once you gather these materials, just open up the satchel and craft away. You can craft Pokeballs, potions, revives, and many more things. You can unlock more options by getting higher star rankings, and also by purchasing more crafting recipes in Jubilife Village. The materials that you use to craft Pokeballs, being the tumblestones and apricorns, are naturally the most common ones by far. Once you get access to the Great and Ultra Balls, they require iron chunks to make, which you get by picking them up off the floor, or sometimes by breaking up the iron rocks. Having constant access to new Pokeballs and potions at essentially any time changes the gameplay loop for this game greatly. You are going to spend a majority of your time running around the big open areas. No, not that one. So it's in the game's best interest to keep you out exploring as long as possible. So with this in mind, gathering materials is extremely easy and quick. See a shiny rock or a tree with a fruit, just switch to a Pokemon, chuck it over, and keep running. Doesn't even matter what Pokemon you throw, or you're on land and throw a Magikarp, that's perfectly fine. Having to catch Pokemon interspersed with getting materials constantly in order to make sure you stay stocked up on items makes the gameplay loop very addicting. There is a lot less dead air than you would expect, since you are encouraged to collect as many materials as possible in order to keep catching Pokemon, which feeds into itself since you need to clear research goals in order to proceed in the game itself, which is actually really smart from the game developers. Although the later areas of the game severely limit some of the more necessary materials like the apricorns, meaning that making new Pokeballs is much harder, which which is probably meant to encourage the player to make better use of their available resources, but in actuality, all it does is make me have to go back to Area 1 to grind resources every now and then, or just buy a frick ton of apricorns at the shop, which is definitely annoying, although even then, backtracking is perfectly fine since you still need to fulfill some of those research goals, so it isn't the worst thing to have to do, although I would prefer if the developers weren't so stingy in the later areas, but whatever. You are technically more likely to have an overabundance of Pokeballs by late game, so I'll just write it off as a nitpick. You might be thinking, wow, there's a lot of variety in how you can catch Pokemon, but I want more options. Well, you are in luck, because much like the rest of the series, there are more than one type of Pokeball at your disposal. The available types of Pokeballs in this game are a lot more limited than in previous games, so rip fans of the Heal Ball. However, I think this makes sense given the fact this game takes place a long time before the modern games. They haven't done enough research to justify whatever the hell a Love Ball is. All you have is your standard Pokeball, Great Ball, and Ultra Ball. These don't act in any special way and have always been the primary capture method of Pokemon, with the Great and Ultra Balls basically meaning a higher chance of success, but require more rare materials in order to craft or more money spent if you choose to buy them in stores. But since just using regular Pokeball variants could get pretty damn repetitive even while using items, they added two more separate categories with Feather Balls and Leaden Balls. Feather Balls have a much wider throwing arc than normal Pokeballs, allowing them to go long distances and catch Pokemon much faster. They also work against flying Pokemon better, so that's going to be the main reason why you'll want to use them. It works quite well when there are Pokemon that you can't approach normally. Abra and Obsidian Fields is a great example of that, since they're always teleporting and will just flee if you try to approach them. These can be used strategically to catch Pokemon that fly in very specific areas, usually on mountaintops, which are actually really challenging to get. There's also the Leaden Balls, which have a greater chance of catching heavier Pokemon. Let's see how far these can go. These have a better chance of removing my toes and catching Pokemon. You use it at first and think it's the worst thing in the world. Like, look at this arc. This is literally useless. But in actuality, they encourage the player to sneak up on a Pokemon from behind. The game is trying to teach you how to learn to utilize berries in combination with items like food, smoke bombs, and explored apricorns. They are genuinely one of the best ways to increase your odds of catching Pokemon, a direct reward for being stealthy.
As hopefully made clear by now, I've only said it like 3 times, but hopefully it's clear, Pokemon catching is a huge part of the game, debatably just as, if not more important, than the regular story stuff. And as said earlier, this is with the aim of completing the good old Pokédex, although while it is good, this isn't old. Well, it's old as in, 2,000 years ago, but not like Pokemon Red and Green. Okay, this joke fell flat in its face.
Dude, you're blowing this.
What's cool about the Pokédex in this game is that for a Pokemon to be properly recorded, you can't just go up to one and simply catch it as you could in the previous generations. Otherwise, this game would be like 5 hours long. Instead, there are various tasks the game wants you to complete before it's a finalized entry. Let's take a look at a Pokemon, I don't know, Wurmple. Everyone likes Wurmple. On the right side of our screen are the research tasks. To fully record it, you're tasked with getting to 10 points. As the number raises, you actually do get more information on the Pokemon you're researching too, like what foods they may like, and being given the ability to look at their heights and weights just by being on the field with them. Going back to our Wurmple example, some of the tasks include catching a specific number of the Pokemon, catching lighter specimens, catching them without being caught, watching them use Poison Sting, and evolving them. The red symbol means that that task will count for 2 times the points. Now don't worry, you don't need to do all of this to get to 10, which you could probably tell by doing basic math, but whatever. If you are crazy enough to do this though, you'll get a perfect ranking on the Pokemon, which doesn't do anything besides increasing your shiny odds. For those who don't know, a shiny Pokemon is a different color Pokemon that shows up pretty rarely. I'll talk about that a bit more as the video goes on. This overall though is pretty smart as a reward because the people who are interested in looking for shiny Pokemon are probably the only people also insane enough to perfect their entries. Let's be real here. It never feels like getting to a level 10 is that hard. I think they balanced it pretty well. All Pokemon have different methods of increasing their research levels. I can't explain them all as there's probably hundreds of unique ways. Some of these aren't just catching Pokemon, but defeating the Pokemon with a specific move or just defeating them period. And sometimes it's about giving them some food or throwing a scatterbang at them. Actually doing research. It's really cool. And that's what's best about this system overall. It really encourages you to interact with Hisui in so many different unique ways. It's so much fun to sit in the grass like Solid Snake and catch Pokemon without being followed. Or if you just want to catch 25 Wurmples and have that be your completion method. I mean, nothing's stopping you. I don't recommend you do that, but like I said, you could do it. This presents a really immersive and rewarding catching system. It might not be for everyone, but keep in mind you can still catch Pokemon the old-fashioned way. This is the type of system I would have loved to see in Scarlet and Violet. I was stunned they got rid of it so quickly, because the other thing this system does is breaks up the monotony of Pokemon games. Like in Pokemon games, it's always a matter of walking, stopping everything you're doing, going into menus. You know, it's an RPG, I get it, but sometimes I want to catch something without it being a project. In Pokemon Legends Arceus, when you can take your time and strategize, it really feels like you're in the living and breathing world of Pokemon with them. It could be a bit repetitive at times, sure, but at the very least, it's hard to deny the sheer immersion that this brings to the table. When leaving Jubilife to complete your tasks, you are sent on what is referred to as an excursion. At the start of the area will be some sort of camp. Where'd you get this from, Scarlet and Violet? They're also in Sword and Shield, but I also block out that game exists in my head. Well, to be fair, there's not a lot you could do here. It's a lot more of a defined feature in Sword and Shield, to be fair. Talking to the Galaxy member, really, that's his name? He'll let you rest up and change the time of day. Being able to change the time of day whenever you please is a really great feature. I like the realistic aspect of matching a real-life clock in the older games, but fuck real life, man. I want to play a video game. They even thought to add an option to just let you sleep and not change the time if you just need to heal, which I really appreciate. He also lets you access your pasture from here, which is basically your Pokemon that are not in your current party, which I did not expect with this game, because I figured they'd just be like, ooh, that doesn't make any sense. Play this game in Sword and Shield back to back. Legends Arceus, for being a Pokemon game, is ridiculously modern. There's also a shop here, but like the other shops in this game, prices aren't great because they really encourage you just to craft, so the stores are ultimately only an option. Also at the camp, you can talk to our professor, who comes to each excursion and just stands around. And he gives you the option to show him your new Pokedex entries and end your excursion. I don't want to go home, screw you. Some of the camps let you play a balloon race minigame where you have to pop a certain amount of balloons in a time limit. These are usually done with the assistance of your rideable Pokemon, and honestly, if you're going for 100%, they're not easy. One problem I have with them though is I get lost like way too easily. I don't know if it's the game's fault, but when it's so open, it's hard not to get lost once in a while, which sucks because it just means you lose the race instantly. There are additional quests throughout the game that lets you set up multiple camps for each area. One thing I don't understand though is you see the professor and this other guy chilling by one camp, but if you fly to the other one like 2 seconds away, they'll also be there. Are they clones? How did they get there? This isn't explained.
If you thought that the Breath of the Wild comparisons have ended already, then well, let me introduce you to the Arceus Phone. You're given it early on, and it's mainly in the game just to have an in-game explanation as to why waypoints exist. It also functions as a map that you can pull up anytime in order to locate the camps and fast travel. Let's just be honest with ourselves though, the Arc Phone is just a can I copy your homework meme in full effect. This is only in the game because Breath of the Wild had a Sheikah slate.
They did it because Nintendo did it. It couldn't have been a coincidence.
I find it really funny since the whole point of Sheikah Slate is that it was a representation of the Wii U gamepad, and later a Switch, as an in-game object. The Arceus Phone has no reason to really exist. If they wanted to represent the map as an in-game item, why not just use the Pokedex? You know, that book that you're carrying with you the whole game? I don't think it would be unrealistic to think that it would contain a map of the area. Game Freak had to literally add a phone floating around the intro just so this inclusion would make sense, which I find really funny. You didn't have to copy every part of Breath of the Wild in this game, guys.
One thing to keep in mind though is that at least starting out the game, you're only given a certain amount of storage space. As in basically none. We gotta upgrade this. This fills up fast. It's very common to play this game, not think about it at first, and then get like 3 items and you're just like, oh, this sucks. Well, to get more item storage, we have to talk to this guy at Team Galaxy headquarters. His name is Bagin. Haha. Very funny. Anyways, he'll increase your storage for some money. At first, it starts at 100 Pokédollars, then raises to 200, then eventually gets to 1,000, then his final slot is 1 million Pokédollars. Dude, who are you? You're just sitting here in the headquarters with no other purpose besides scamming children. Creep. To top things off, the Pokemon selection itself is pretty sweet too. Sure, it's a bit limited in comparison to other games, as only 238 Pokemon are required for the completion of the Pokédex. There are 4 special Pokemon though, but they don't count for the completed dex. A big point of contention with Pokemon Sword and Shield was the fact that they removed hundreds of Pokemon and that there's no national dex. So you might think, oh, you're being a hypocrite, and to that I say only partially. I mean, the national dex thing was never really my issue. It was more so the fact that they cut down the Pokemon without updating their models and lying about that. So in my opinion, it's a lot different when the Pokemon here exist in a living, breathing world, as each one requires a lot more time and care to develop, meaning it's a completely understandable restriction why they would cut back a bit, as opposed to Sword and Shield, where this was not really an aspect of the game. A lot of the Pokemon in Hisui are special and feel important to this world, like the Clefas and Clefairies that appear by a lake, but only at night, making it feel mystical. Cherums only pop out of trees, and certain Pokemon can be seen swimming in hot springs, and that's just funny. beginning. If you sit down and just watch a Pokemon move around, you'll see them go about their merry day. It's not like they just plopped character models down and did nothing else with it. They specifically crafted and gave special attention to each and every Pokemon here, and that is why it's completely okay for it to be a smaller number. They all have unique animations and battles too. Sure, the number's light, but for a catch-em-all type of experience, I think it's totally fine, especially if you choose to view this game as A, thousands of years ago before all the Pokemon were probably even alive, and B, a pseudo-reboot of the franchise where going back to the status quo makes a bit more sense. That being said, I can see the argument for this being even a bit too light still. Like, it does suck being in the last area of the game and being like, hey, it's a Bidoof and a Baniri, and it's like, these are all Area 1 Pokemon, man. A lot of trainer fights don't really have any surprises as a result as well. It's kind of just like, oh, okay, I've seen this Pokemon like 500 times, man. I think they should have aimed for just a bit more, or have any type of serviceable DLC to make the game feel more complete. It's okay, Game Freak only does that for their mediocre games.
As good as this gameplay loop is, wouldn't catching Pokemon get pretty repetitive after a while? There has to be some variety when catching the various Pokemon throughout the landscape. As it turns out, having this game take place in a time before humans befriended Pokemon does have a secondary benefit to it. The Pokemon aren't too fond of being caught, and aren't afraid to put up a fight. This is shown to the player in the second catching tutorial. The game may start with you catching a Bidoof that doesn't put up any fight, but immediately after, the game establishes that this isn't your grandpa's Pokemon. You can't just throw Pokeballs willy-nilly and expect success. These Pokemon aren't going to get captured without a fight. You are now expected and required to use something called strategy and effort to catch things. I know it's an unheard concept in this series. Sneaking becomes a huge aspect of the game, since the tall grass that used to hide Pokemon in previous games will now become your hiding place. Certain Pokemon who spot you will try to attack you, and your ability to capture them will instead be replaced with the thrown Pokeball simply bouncing off of them. The funny looking bonking noise that accompanies this is a perfect way to both amuse and teach the player that you can no longer catch the Pokemon through normal methods. Now, you could just battle the wild Pokemon normally. We don't want to do that. So instead of getting caught in the first place, you'll need to try to sneak up on these types of Pokemon and catch them off guard instead. You even get an animation to indicate when you throw the Pokeball to their back, which will increase the odds of them getting caught. I think this is an incredibly smart mechanic of the game. It both adds challenge to the exploration of the world itself and also makes the player feel like they're actually catching wild Pokemon. You have to actually come up with some sort of battle plan before engaging certain Pokemon, which makes finding new Pokemon more exciting as a whole. It even extends beyond just sneaking and not sneaking with certain Pokemon, since there is a fair amount of variety with the behavior that the Pokemon can exhibit. Some will do nothing, like I mentioned before, but sometimes they will run away or try to attack back. There are even Pokemon like Abra who will just straight up teleport away if you get too close. The Pokemon world, despite looking sort of bland with the graphical limits, actually feels lived in, more so than any other Pokemon game I've ever played. Scarlet and Violet doesn't really have any of this. Sure, you can walk up to the Pokemon and use the auto battle system to technically have a real-time Pokemon experience, but the Pokemon in that game are much more static. They just stand and do nothing most of the time. They don't run after you, even when you literally run circles around them. Pokemon will actually run away from you when you engage in battle, which just feels incredibly lame, especially for a game that was released way after Arceus. If you count less than a year to be way after. Getting back on topic, the items also play a pretty important role in catching certain Pokemon. I dismissed these completely when I first started playing since I just snuck around in tall grass everywhere, but as you get deeper and deeper into the later areas of the game gives you less and less grass, so avoiding the gaze of certain Pokemon can be borderline impossible. So if you want to catch some of these Pokemon without battling, or at least with less battling, then you will need to use items. The berries are the most plentiful to the player, and Pokemon will follow the berries in order to eat them, giving you time to catch them when they're distracted. Certain Pokemon types will be attracted to certain berries, so it's important to try to collect as many as you can find as you explore. A really good example of berry use are the groups of Hippowdon found in the Coronet Highlands. There was essentially zero cover available to the player, so trying to catch these can be a huge pain, but simply chuck a Chesto berry their way and you can catch a whole group of them easily. This game rewards the players who understand the mechanics in this way, which just adds depth to the catching in a huge way. Later in the game, you can also unlock access to crafting smoke bombs and stealth sprays, which makes sneaking much easier when there's a lack of tall grass, although the actual smoke effects do look garbage. There is also the Scatterbang, which is used to get Pokemon to run away, although I use this maybe 2 whole times in my playthrough since I usually just opted to catch them instead. The type of item I really want to highlight as useful are the throwing items that can stun Pokemon, which are the snowballs, balls of mud, and spoiled apricorns. Sometimes you get caught by accident and really don't feel like running away and running back again, so as a secondary option you can just throw one of these at the aggravated Pokemon and it will become stunned. allowing you to catch them. These are extremely useful, even if the implications over throwing apricorns at Pokemon in order to get them to lose consciousness are questionable at best. I swear it's just for research.
New to Legends Arceus are the Alpha Pokemon, one of the biggest additions to Pokemon Legends Arceus. And I literally mean that when I say bigger. Alpha Pokemon are gigantic in size, have much better stats, and also have red eyes, which is usually the tell if they're an Alpha Pokemon or not. Which means Alpha Zubat are impossible to determine, because they have no eyes. I actually caught a few of them and was like, oh, that's an alpha. The alpha system lends itself to sort of what the Xenoblade franchise does. Sometimes you'll be walking around and see a super high level enemy that you're not quite ready to go against yet. It's a classic early game trap to try to battle or catch one. It's like bringing a plastic knife to an atomic war, but there is some strategy still. Once you tame the area's noble Pokemon, upon returning, the chance an alpha Pokemon shows up just in the wild is significantly raised. A lot of the times throughout the map, there are Pokemon that will consistently be alphas no matter what, in predetermined spots. And catching an alpha Pokemon isn't the end of the allure, as your alpha Pokemon even show up big in battles, so it's a pretty cool flex too. This isn't just something you see once and forget about if you choose to use them. It's an integrated part of this world. Let's not mince words. Catching an alpha Pokemon in the wild can be very, very difficult, but if you pull it off, it's probably one of the most satisfying moments that Legends Arceus has to offer you as a player. Here's where you might want to consider using some of the game's many items. These include smoke bombs, which obscure your view from the Pokemon. There are berries and food, which, as said earlier, your Pokedex will tell you what each Pokemon likes when you make good enough progress on their research tasks. You preferably want to get good at the game here so you can actually use your heavy balls. Heavy balls, since that significantly increases your odds, especially if you give them a good old concussion. Man, I feel kind of bad. As long as your star ranking allows you to catch the specific Pokemon's level, with enough planning and maybe a bit of luck, you can catch an alpha Pokemon early on and have a Pokemon almost double the current level for your team. This adds another potential level of strategy in a game that rewards experienced players for putting in the effort to master its catching system. Actually battling an alpha Pokemon, just like a lot of the trainers in late game, can be surprisingly difficult. They all seem to have some really clever AI, often knowing how to use the new battle system strategies this game has to offer. And I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed with that, and I myself even picked up a few strategies from these moments. I guess Pokemon must have evolved over the next 2,000 years and just became stupider. This must be where all the challenge went missing from Pokemon in the last 10 years. They're no pushover. The alpha Pokemon also totally changed the way you play the game, as in now, instead of just choosing 6 Pokemon throughout the entire adventure, it's a lot more feasible for Pokemon to come and go in your team as you catch them, since they're so strong, and you don't have to worry about catching them up with the rest of your team. To be fair to Sword and Shield, words that I hate saying more than anything, this was an aspect of the wild area to an extent, but it's done so much better here.
There was also new Pokemon forms in this roster. I think out of all the major features of this installment, the Hisuian Forms and evolutions of Pokemon were kind of disappointing compared to previous titles. I know that's Pokemon and all, so Game Freak needs some new Pokemon to shovel over the advertisements for this game, but these games get released so damn often. I think that the Game Freak artists might want to break at some point, guys. Anyway, the starters in this game are all reused starter Pokemon who get new Hisuian evolutions. They have a nice theme where they're all based on different trainers from their respective regions, with Decidueye being based on Hala from Sun and Moon, Typhlosion being based on Morty from Gold and Silver, and Samurott being based on Grimsley from Black and White. The reference is really cute and all, but in execution they just kind of look a little bit ugly. Some of the designs are just really jarring compared to the original forms, especially Decidueye, who just doesn't look right when compared to the designs of the original evolution lines. I do like the new Typhlosion design. The purple flames look pretty neat, and it's funny that he just looks like he's high now. Samurott, however, just doesn't work as a dark type, but that's just the starters. The rest of the Pokemon all have varying qualities to them, from really good designs like Arcanine, Zoroark, and Voltorb and Electrode, who all put new spins on these Pokemon. To reference slapdash concepts such as a fighting type Lilligant, a poison fighting Sneasel with an ugly evolution, and a rather unnecessary update to Quillfish. Overall, you can tell they were kind of thrown together just so this game can technically have new Pokemon despite taking place in Sinnoh. Although I do really like that Voltorb and Electrode design, the wood grain is kind of neat, and it makes sense that as a species it would evolve with the Pokeball design.
One of the biggest changes in Legends Arceus is the new battle system. It's important to note that battling is not the main focus of the game, which is why I bring this up specifically after talking about catching Pokemon and the Pokédex. The less emphasis on battle is sort of explained in game by the fact that this game takes place when people were just learning to live with their Pokemon, and not everyone knew how to battle yet. Haha, idiots. Or they just conveniently wanted a reason not to super expand this one aspect of the game. I don't know, it's Game Freak, flip a coin, man. All jokes aside though, the battles are pretty damn good. I assume most of you know how Pokemon battles work, but if you don't, here's a quick summary. Every Pokemon has types and moves with types, and each time you use a move, depending on the other Pokemon's type, it'll be a regular attack, super effective, not very effective, or goddamn useless. I don't know how they figure this stuff out. Why does poison not affect steel? Am I missing something? White Pikmin are typing. Now battles are much more nuanced than that. I mean, there are status ailments, there are physical and special types of moves, things like that, but it would take all day to explain it, so I'm giving a very simple explanation for the purpose of this video. Because this video is already going to be like 2 hours and I'm crying, okay? I'm literally crying. I'm probably editing this right now, listening to this, and actually crying. PLA is at its core kind of the same as the old games when it comes to battling. It feels a lot more alive. For one, you can run around during the battle, which is one of my favorite things they added for immersion. You might get hit by an attack, sure, but wait, how am I alive? The best stride that this takes over Sword and Shield is that the battles start pretty much anywhere now, which is great and something they did transfer to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but you can't run around there. Regardless, no more predetermined backgrounds from this point on in the series. Those totally took me out of the experience when I was playing Sword and Shield personally. Like, cool, here's a white background. You guys couldn't design a restaurant? Who's cutting corners over there? Someone should get a pink slip. To start a battle with a wild Pokemon, all you gotta do is throw your Pokemon near it. If you throw it directly at the back, you crush its skull in, and they are caught unawares. Wait, unawares. Okay, I looked this up. That's not a typo. That's just a really old word, but I don't know. It just looks really weird. I actually thought it was a typo the first time I played this game. Caught me off guards. One thing I appreciate about the battles is that each Pokemon has specific and proper animations, instead of whatever this was from Pokemon Sword and Shield. So as I said earlier, there are a lot less Pokemon in this game, but they fine-tuned all of them and gave them specific care and love. They go up to each other and attack too. This is how Pokemon on the Switch should be. And this is the point of contention I have with Scarlet and Violet. It's back to everyone fighting from 10 miles away from each other, which ultimately means the battling in that game is 2 steps above Sword and Shield, but 2 steps behind Arceus. The battles starting out of nowhere, the realistic animations, and being able to move around may sound like smaller things, but it really helps with feeling immersed with the world. And not to mention, it's like 5 times faster than going, you know, bump, bump, with a little load screen animation. It just makes the game a lot more snappy. As for the battles themselves, as said, they're mostly the same, but the biggest addition to the game is the agile and strong attacks. Agile means your attack will do a bit less damage, but you'll be quicker, meaning you might get another turn in before your opponent. This can be used fairly strategically. For example, you can use an agile move to inflict a status effect and then get a strong attack in. As expected, the strong move does the opposite. You get a much more powerful attack at the cost of losing speed, and typically I use this if I think I'm close to finishing the Pokemon off, because the downside of it is that they might get 2 turns. And the AI is good enough in this game where they will take advantage of that. They will bully you. Unfortunately, there are a few features they cut from the battle system in comparison to the previous Pokemon games. Abilities are now gone, which, yeah, as much as I love this game, I do have to accept that this is a pretty big loss. It means that a few Pokemon are somewhat worse than in the other games. The ones that come to my head are Pokemon like Ghastly, who used to have Levitate, because it's literally flying in the air. But now ground type moves are super effective against them anyway because of the poison type, and it somehow hits them even though it's in the air. Cool, my Clyde is screwed. I guess it's a Blinky day now. In general, there's also a lot less moves here than in the previous Pokemon games, probably to compensate for the fact that they have unique animations. To be honest, I don't care, but I know for those who like competitive battling, it's a pretty big loss. And that's the main argument I see for Pokemon Sword and Shield. It's a weak single player game, but great for competitive battling. So if you're strictly a competitive battler, well, I do say this battle system is better and this game still has some fantastic battles in it, I will say up front that PLA might not be for you. One thing that sucks Pokeballs is that trainers can now send up multiple Pokemon at once, which is really stupid because you can't. I can accept this in the wild a bit more, as sometimes Pokemon will gang up on you, like nature genuinely would do, but in trainer battles it's like, hey buddy, screw you! Here's 3 Pokemon versus 1. No one plays fair in Hisui. I don't get that at all. Where's your sportsmanship? Isn't this the old days when people cared about their chivalry? One thing I hate about the battles in this game, and a lot of RPGs do this, but I'm scapegoating Legends Arceus here, is basically when your Pokemon don't get EXP when they die during a battle. I hate this, because what this leads to is in the more difficult fights, only one of your Pokemon may end up getting experience for it if it's the last one standing. This might sound like a small thing, but when it happens, every battle, which it does for me, this leads to a dangerous cycle where you're basically always just gonna be under-leveled because your Pokemon never get a chance to all grow together. I don't know, maybe this is a me exclusive issue, but it happened to me frequently enough where I felt the need to mention it. I would be wasting revives in some fights just so my Pokemon that were under-leveled would end up getting experience, but then it usually means the Pokemon in that turn died because of that, so they wouldn't get experience, so someone's always getting shafted, and all the time it's you. At least on the field, you can run a lot more easily from battles now. You can select run, but you can also literally just flee on foot. Okay, I'm losing, bye. The catching is not the only real-time action that Pokemon Legends Arceus has, though. When you fight the noble Pokemon, you're taken to an arena, where you're tasked with calming down the nobles by throwing bags at them. Yeah, take that. Here's a bag. Bags of what, you might ask? Food. You're throwing food at them. Imagine just throwing food at someone. You do this with the R trigger, and what I would describe this like, and this is still kind of generous, is baby's first Elden Ring. You have to use the dodge roll and time things and actually use, what's this word? Strategy? Strategy. Yeah, you have to use strategy to win. The first few fights are pretty easy, but the late game fights are genuinely probably some of the hardest moments in the history of the franchise. One thing that is noteworthy is that if you take down a bar of its health, then you can restart from that checkpoint. Okay, never mind, it's not that hard. You got bailed out on this one, guys. It does make this pretty easy, unfortunately. But if you care about the challenge, doing these in one go is brutal. You can also send your Pokemon in at times to fight them, which means that the old method of playing isn't entirely abandoned, and it makes for a pretty interesting fusion.
As you complete your quest to defeat the noble Pokemon, you'll unlock some rideable Pokemon in order to help you traverse the world. You get a total of 5 of them throughout the game, and gee, these do seem to resemble an aspect from another very popular game. Joking aside, these are super convenient and arguably serve a different purpose from Breath of the Wild's special powers altogether. You can traverse the land faster with a Rhydeer, which follows the modern open world trend of having a rideable horse-like creature. Then you can dig up treasure at Ursaluna. No one uses this after the tutorial. Like, sure, you can get materials with it, but it's not particularly necessary. Climb walls with Sneasler, swim with Basculin, and most importantly, fly with Bravery. They all control well enough, but Bravery can be a little frustrating since the flying has a pretty dang sharp descent. Aside from Ursaluna, each of the rideable Pokemon make traversing the world way easier. Sneasler is personally my favorite of these, not because it's the most useful one, but mainly because of the way that the player looks while sitting in the basket. Before you get Basculin, water is your worst nightmare. You can drown in like 2 feet of water. How does one even drown in that? It's extremely frustrating how little of a chance you get to save yourself in the water. Although the game doesn't really punish you aside from a respawn, so it's not a huge problem. It is fun to swim in the water though, and one thing I love about this game is that you can fight Pokemon on water, even without water types. Oh look, they get a tiny little adorable raft. Aside from the ease of access, throwing a Pokeball while airborne slows down time just like, don't even need to bring it up at this point. And with gyro aiming on, you can turn super fast, which is very funny. All of the rideable Pokemon shift together really well. Honestly, I'm surprised. It's quite seamless how they merge into each other, and gives the game a really smooth feeling that complements the immersion of the Pokemon catching quite well. The only thing that irritates me though is that you can't catch Pokemon when flying while riding on land. It's a small thing, but it is annoying. That and flying around the map isn't that fun, since the bird doesn't feel nearly as natural to use as the glider from that game we've mentioned already, since it's clearly the inspiration for the mechanic.
To ride these Pokemon, you press the start button. Oh, that's gross. Alright, let's talk about the UI and menus in this game. They're not great. To open the main menu, you press up on the D-pad. I put nearly 150 hours into this game over the course of 2 playthroughs, and I have not once gotten used to this. Up on the D-pad should be for the rideable Pokemon in my opinion, and start should be for the main menu. Why did they switch it? To make matters worse, to switch out your rideable Pokemon, you use left and right on the D-pad. Maybe they shifted it at the very last minute or something, I don't know. Down on the D-pad brings up the Pokedex. Still awkward, but not the absolute worst. And minus brings up the map. But in my opinion, it would have been nice if there was a bit more of a consolidation for the maps in this game, because there are 3 separate buttons for menus. This isn't the most egregious thing in JRPGs or gaming in general. I mean, there typically are a lot of menus these days, but usually in my experience, they at least boil down to like 2. Playing PLA and then playing something like Xenoblade will completely give you some whiplash. Another mechanism to help you fill the Pokedex in this game are the mass outbreaks. Sometimes when leaving Jubilife Village, this clown at the front will let you know about a mass outbreak occurring in one of the 5 areas. How does this game determine which Pokemon gets a mass outbreak, you might ask? Total luck. Yep, if you want a specific Pokemon in an Outbreak, whether you're a shiny hunter or just want to complete your tasks, be prepared to hit that reset button. Well, I guess the Switch doesn't have a reset button, just close the software. All jokes aside, that's not a flaw with the game, as these are designed to be special events and not guarantees. Upon showing up to the mass outbreak, it's as simple as it sounds. There's a lot of the little critters running around the same area. How you approach it is not as simple as just running up to them and catching a bunch of them though, at least not always. If the Pokemon in the outbreak are Pokemon that'll usually attack you, well, you're probably gonna die. If these are Pokemon that usually run from you, well, they'll all run from you, but like 10 times more. You see what I'm trying to say here? What this adds to the game is still having the rewarding and engaging catch system present, but ramping up the difficulty, if you will. If you find stuff like the foods and grass you hide in a bit more on the useless side normally, this will give you a genuine reason to use them. Mass outbreaks always make it really easy to fulfill some of your pesky research tasks, like if you're tasked with finding a certain size Pokemon, or just trying to catch a lot of the rarer types of Pokemon, like the original Generation 4 starters. But realistically, we all know why these were added. Pokemon Team just loves fulfilling our shiny Pokemon addictions.
Yes, this is it, and oh my god!
Mass outbreaks help with finding shiny Pokemon, most definitely. In general, shiny Pokemon are a lot easier to get in this game as opposed to the last few games. In the first generation of Pokemon, getting a shiny had a 1 in 8,192 chance. The odds were raised a bit more as the generations continued, but regardless, these first generations made catching shiny Pokemon a serious grind. It also makes me feel old, because nowadays, like, everyone gets a shiny Pokemon. Back in my day, it used to be a serious event, something you were lucky if it happened to you at all in like 100 hours of playing. Somewhere along the line in Pokemon, they decided to kind of just take this whole thing away and make it a lot easier, which I'm personally mixed on. Pokemon Go, for instance, has a shiny rate of 1 out of 500. That's just as likely as someone typing a comment right now mad at me for being angry at this. Well, Legends Arceus took that step a lot further, because if you strive for every single method of raising your shiny odds in this game, you can narrow it down to a 1 in 128.49 chance. What you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's still a little low, but compared to the old games, is basically a freebie. Here's how you fully increase your shiny odds in this game, and trust me, I have 2 boxes almost in my original files, so I'm a certified professional. I certified myself. First off, as said earlier, you can increase your shiny odds by perfecting a Pokedex entry, which is a heavy grind, as even one Pokemon can take a few hours of gameplay. Even if you just choose to raise it to a level 10 and don't perfect it, you still do get a bit of an increased odds, so I'm glad they gave the non-degenerate people some. I'm glad. Lastly, if you get the shiny charm, this also increases your odds. Getting this means getting every level 10 Pokedex entry, so it's hard, but a damn good reward for doing so. Kind of an aside, but there's a side quest in this game where you run into a shiny Ponyta. You might think that's where I got my shiny Ponyta, Luigi, but I actually got mine in a mass outbreak. At first I popped off. I was like, this is so cool, I get to put this in the video, but then I realized like every player has a shiny Ponyta because of this. But mine is more special than yours. Look at my precious Luigi. I also got an Alakazam. That was cool. Since we're talking about this game's mechanics and alternatives of catching, let's talk about the space-time distortions, or STD for short. God damn it.
STD? Who in their right mind would name their Pokemon STD?
Early on into the adventure, your rival will tell you that space-time distortions might form over areas as you explore. Yup, totally normal phenomenon. I like how the fabric of the universe tearing apart phases absolutely no one. Am I going crazy here? Yeah, there's just a giant black hole that came out of the sky, man. I'm late to work. When a space-time distortion forms, the game gives you a little warning. From there, you have a few minutes to get to it before it starts, which is actually a good amount of time. I've never felt screwed out of getting to one. If you need time to drop off your items real quick, you have plenty of time to set up. Basically, there'll be a defined area here which spawns tougher, but more importantly, more rare Pokemon, some of which can only be found here, such as the evolutions, at least without having to evolve them. And look, it's the Pokemon that almost got the entire anime canceled. How you doing, buddy? A lot of alpha Pokemon also come out here too. It's genuinely some of the most difficult part of the game, especially if you're under-leveled, and it's a good way to put your survival skills to the test. During this sequence, there are a lot of items that normally don't spawn elsewhere. Lots of evolution stones for one, but more importantly, money! Lots of selling items such as nuggets, comet shards, and star pieces appear. Shards also spawn, red, blue, and green, a callback to the first 3 Pokemon games. Oh, that's cute. Everyone at first has no clue what to do with these, just like, ooh, cool. Later on, you can craft comet shards of them, so hold on to them. Don't sell them like I used to do in my first playthrough. You'll feel regret. Space-time distortions are a pretty nice addition. They do get a bit boring after you've seen which area offers, to be honest, but if you care about the money and completing and perfecting your Pokédex, they become an absolute necessity. Sometimes they do take a while to spawn, though. It can take anywhere between 5 to 40 minutes, but the good news is by 40 minutes, it is 100% guaranteed. So if you're just trying to get a lot of one Pokemon, leave the Switch on and be patient.
Since you are in the wild in this game, the aggressiveness of the wild Pokemon doesn't end with just your Pokemon. You need to run and dodge enemy attacks in real time. Even if you're in a battle, you will still take damage if you get hit. Even outside of a battle, Pokemon can give you status ailments, which you might think isn't a big deal at first, but you have limited access to your noble Pokemon and can't flee easily. Taking it a step further, you could even faint if you take enough damage from wild Pokemon. It's really wild to think about how much of a significant addition to the series that this is. There was always a metaphorical barrier between the player and the world around them, well, besides the literal invisible barriers. The whole concept of Pokemon is that when the player turns a certain age, usually implied to be 10, that they are set free to explore the wider Pokemon world. But even despite the obvious notion of danger that concept presents, the player is usually basically no danger. There is no real risk to the trainer themselves. Now obviously some of the spin-off material like the anime is hinted towards wild Pokemon fighting back and trying to attack trainers, but as far as the games are concerned, the Pokemon world is completely safe and fun for all. But since Arceus takes place in a time before Pokemon and humans were friendly, all bets are off. This isn't your grandma's Pokemon where they don't even let you touch grass without a Pokemon. Here, you're running free and they will hunt you down. I really like how this adds some tension to your playthrough. It helps encourage the player to sneak around and not get noticed for more than just getting the flank on catching Pokemon. It also doubles as a reason to keep the player from just jumping off a cliff to skip half the map. No Rotom Phone to save you in this game. Even if the water breaks your fall every time or not, you do not want to die in this game, since you lose a pretty significant amount of items every time you do. And it always includes the one that you wanted to keep. No, my Firestone! So I highly recommend being careful while running around. Or you could just buy all 5 tiers of the Tempting Charm if you really want to prevent item loss at the trade-off of storage slots and Poké Dollars. I think it's fairly easy not to die, but do you really want to risk it?
In a game all about collecting them all, you can rest assured that Pokemon Legends Arceus has a lot of traditional collectibles. I don't mean the Pokemon, I mean stuff like blue coins from Mario Sunshine, or Koroks from... Man, how do you not mention Breath of the Wild? There's one side quest where you meet with a kid who informs you about a Pokemon you can't see until you collect all of what's called the Wisps throughout the game. Well, at least it's not 900. Wisps exist at both night and day, but are really only super visible at night. I personally don't recommend going for them until you have a Bravery in late game, because it makes them super easy to find then, but there are a few of them tucked away in tight spots too. My first playthrough, I was like, oh, I'm gonna be fancy. I'm not gonna look up any spots. I'm so unique and cool. And then there was one that was hidden under a cave in Alabaster Islands, and I had to use Google. You win, Pokemon team, because otherwise that would have taken me 5 hours to find. After you get all the Wisps is when you get the ability to catch Spiritomb. You gotta ask yourself, was this worth the grind, the time, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the sacrifice? Well, too bad. If you want to complete the Pokédex, you have to do it, so suck it up. Also in this game are the unknowns. There are 28 of the Alphabet Soup Pokemon lying around the map. These aren't collectibles in the regular sense, but you get to throw a Pokeball at it, so it's kind of a middle ground, and it's the only research task possible for unknowns, so if you do want to complete the Pokédex, you might want to put in a 2 weeks notice at work, because you're going to be busy. Thankfully, they do give you a list of hints of where the unknown are, so you aren't going to just have to rely on Google. You only mostly have to rely on Google. Other than that, here's a collectible basically no one talks about. You remember Ursaluna that Ninja talked about earlier? Well, if you actually choose to use this Pokemon, which to be honest, not a lot of people do after Area 2, even though you should, you can dig up old verses throughout the maps, which give you some lore. You don't get anything for collecting them, and it's not even like a quest or anything, so there's not a lot of incentive to do it, but I do appreciate some of the lore though, and I love that the developers use the Hisui region to flesh out Sinnoh. And it's not just through these too, there's obviously, you know, the whole game, but also there's these little cave paintings throughout the map you can stumble upon just throughout exploring. I don't know what this means, but it's a nice touch. And that's the gameplay mainly. There's a lot to do, a lot of mechanics to be thinking about. It's an in-depth, immersive, good experience. Arguably, it overshadows the story. And we kind of just prove that by putting the story aside for like 20 minutes. So let's get back to that. All right, back to the juicy deets, as the kids say. You see, just like the homes of children who play Pokemon, there's some arguing going on between two clans. Oh, that was such a mean joke. I might, should I cut that? I might cut that out of the video. You see, just like the homes of children who play Pokemon, there's some arguing going on between two clans. These are the Diamond and Pearl clans. You see, that's a reference to Pokemon Diamond and... okay, that's obvious. The leader of the Diamond Clan is named Adaman, who looks like an e-boy, and Irida, who looks like an e-girl. The stories in this game overall are pretty serviceable, but there's a lot of tech smashing. I think my least favorite thing about this is that sometimes an action will happen, but instead of showing said action, the game will say, "Trust me bro, it's happening," and the screen will just go black. I really don't like how they did this. It does make the story feel a bit cheaper when everything's happening off screen, and they obviously kind of did that to cut costs, if I had to guess. It'd be like if I was just like, okay, turn off. Oh, all right, I'm saving a bank robbery. Oh, I just saved a bunch of old ladies. Oh, I just won a Nobel Peace Prize. Trust me, it happened. Each of the 5 areas also has a respective leader that presides over their environment. I don't know how to describe these people. They're kind of like, oh, frick it. The champions from Breath of the Wild. They knew what they were doing here. The characters here are well written enough, but I don't think they're that interesting. I would have really liked to see some voice acting, because what it comes down to is you're just going to be mashing a bunch of text, as I said, even when some of the discussions are genuinely interesting. It is a good read if you care about the origins of Sinnoh and get invested in these characters, but sometimes personally I found it a bit too boring, and I found myself a button mashing at times, just wanting to get back to the main gameplay loop. There's even some dialogue trees that are completely useless and always have the same outcome. I don't mind this once in a while in a video game, just kind of as a joke, but it's like every single dialogue tree in this game. What's the point? The 5 areas are not open world like Breath of the Wild, but open area. Think of it something like Monster Hunter. One criticism I have with this game is that some of the areas are fairly similar. You have the Obsidian Fieldlands, which is a grassy plain sort of area, and it might be my favorite area overall. I think it's a graphical high point of the game. Besides the caves, those we'll get to it. We'll get to it, okay? There's a forest here, which is sort of based off of Eterna Forest from Diamond and Pearl, even including a remix of that song. I also like how this area is at first a bit restricted, but as you unlock more rideable Pokemon, it becomes even more explorable. And I think this type of progression, weirdly enough, was something that really kept me invested in always coming back to this first area. I don't know what it is about this. It just felt really well designed. I'm always so hooked when I play this one. Crimson Mirelands is the second area, and it's very okay. There's a lot of grassy parts again, but a lot more of a focus on swamps and mud. I don't know, it's kind of boring. This is how they introduce more ground and poison Pokemon, which isn't the worst deal in the world, but the whole area just kind of comes off as a filler world. It certainly exists, that can at least be said. There's also a village here for the Diamond Clan. Move! The third area is Cobalt Coastlands. I'm fairly mixed on this one. There's a lot of grassy areas again, sure, but this time there's a, well, coast. I think this area tries to fit too many tropes into one is a problem I have with it, because you do get a pretty expansive water section. It's fairly large and well done, but on the inverse, here we have a volcano area that's tucked into the goddamn corner and is extremely small. I'll be honest, I'm kind of mad this island wasn't just turned into an actual full-on explorable area, because I think a Volcano Land would have broken up the monotony quite a bit of seeing all the grassy areas and given us a fairly new sight to see in our adventure. Come on, man, there's room for like 4 Pokemon here. I want more of this. As a whole, Cobalt Coastlands kind of just throws a lot of us that I would have just liked to see expanded. We also have a spooky area here, and it's brilliant, sure, but it's just super tight and compact. Like, I don't know. This area is still a blast to explore. It's one of my favorites, but it's a lot of ideas thrown into one pot that I would have liked to see fleshed out more. Although I can't lie, it's pretty distracting how Roblox-y this all looks. Come on, what the hell? Game Freak, you guys know you can ask for help with your games, right? You don't have to do it alone if you don't know what you're doing, man.
Hey there, it's me again, JeffCompass from the editing room. I wrote that line before Scarlet and Violet came out, and that is some dangerous foreshadowing right there. I also want to say that Scarlet and Violet makes PLA look like the best video game ever released, and it's really funny to say that because PLA doesn't look that good either. So the standards are dropping, people. We Game Freak, please, dude, this can't go on, man.
You know you work with Nintendo, right? Someone can help you. Ask for help. Game Freak, please. The fourth area takes us to Coronet Highlands. This area is a grassy, rocky mountain type of thing, but we also have a cave for the 2 steel Pokemon they felt like adding to this game. The steel place is even more restricted than the volcano, so I don't know why they bothered adding it. One criticism I have with this area is that it looks so big and explorable on the map, but a lot of it you really can't even touch, so it's a lot smaller than it actually looks. But overall, this level's probably one of my favorites in the entire game. I loved exploring the ruins and Mount Coronet. It gave me the impression that this was indeed a historical location, and I did feel the impact of it. There's also quite a bit of fields here that have specific Pokemon and a graveyard. It almost looks like a tombstone. Yep, that was definitely worth having a text box for, thank you. Despite this ultimately being another grassy area, it still feels surprisingly distinct enough from the rest of the game. The last area, and by far the most unique throughout the experience, is the Alabaster Icelands, and it's very bittersweet to come here, because while I love this area, mainly because it's different, it's the last in the game, and ultimately made me just want some more distinct environments, and left me hoping for some DLC. Like I mentioned earlier, a volcano level would have been so cool, or maybe even take things a step further, give us more type-based worlds, like an industrial land for the steel types, or maybe a space-time distortion full level for the psychic types and fairies, and maybe a trash can for the bug Pokemon. But overall, it's a great area to explore, and I'm glad ice Pokemon do get some love for a change, because in my opinion, they're one of the more underrated types of Pokemon. Alabaster Icelands also has the Pearl Clan, and it also takes us to one of the only puzzles this game has, if you can call it a puzzle. Basically, you have to tell this wall the symbols that statues hold throughout the Snow Point Temple, which all lock on in sequence with each other. I actually had to write these down because I feel like these symbols don't really make that much sense. Like, how the heck is this ice? I get that it's a snowflake, but it looks like a sun. Rock looks more like a diamond, and steel looks like peanut brittle that broke apart or something. Just save yourself the headache and write them down. There's not too many of these puzzles anyway, so it's not a big deal, and it's kind of interesting variety for an otherwise sort of repetitive and basic game, but it feels a bit weird being so late game, whereas the whole game had nothing like it up to this point. Alright, real quick, we need to talk about the graphics in Pokemon Legends Arceus. They are, yeah, not good. Graphics don't make a game good or bad necessarily. I've played many games with amazing graphics that sucked and vice versa, but it doesn't change the fact that the graphics in Pokemon Legends Arceus are a huge detriment. My personal theory is that Game Freak, per big corporation usual, probably gave them a pretty small budget and the team was just like, alright, we don't have that much time, we'll make everything good besides the graphics, which I think is honestly fair. Because look at how bad this game looks, man. The water in Cobalt Coastlands just looks so awful. There's some weird anti-aliasing going on in the caves. Like, even if they didn't get a big budget, that's inexcusable, as they definitely could have figured out how to get rid of that. It's really embarrassing, honestly. And when it's rainy and foggy, the cave entrances in the background stand out like a goddamn sore thumb. So yes, the graphics are shit, but because the game is fun, I can mostly look past it. And the aesthetics are pretty good too. They go for a great watercolor look, an ancient Japan approach for the menus and stuff, which I think works really well and has a lot of charm to it.
And I'll admit the Pokemon that we can all agree on is that the graphics of recent Pokemon games is the topic that garners absolutely no controversy in the slightest. This is a lie. Out of every point of contention in the Switch era of Pokemon, the most infamous one by far is the graphics. Regardless of the quality of the entry, if the game's title doesn't contain the words new or snap, then you have most likely heard a fair amount of discussion around the quality of the graphics. I already went into how this affected the reputation of Generation 8 of Pokemon, and with the heavy backlash that game received, there would be some pretty heavy pressure on how to follow up that disjointed presentation. Then the reveal trailer was shown to the public. Well, that is certainly a frame rate. Yeah, it was pretty clear that this game wasn't going to be any kind of graphical showcase, the usual muddy textures, low detail modeling, and a sense that the game was rushed like usual. Yeah, even if the actual graphical fidelity of the world is quite bad, and the texture work can look straight out of an N-Gage game, like seriously, could the clothing at least look okay? When comparing it to something like Dragon Quest XI, it's so far behind in quality that I feel secondhand embarrassment. Despite the obvious faults, I do think there is some good to the visual presentation of this game. The watercolor aesthetic this game goes for might come across as slightly muted to some, but in Area 1 at least, I think it actually works pretty well and actually looks pretty good. Someone's Shield may have the better looking grass and Pokemon shaders, but it looks way more cobbled together visually. I would even go as far to say that some of the game actually looks like it takes a little bit of an advantage of the Switch's hardware. Just don't look over any cliffs, because trying to look over the world around you and admire its beauty will leave a lot to be desired. Also, unlike Scarlet and Violet, it actually runs at an acceptable frame rate. This actually hurts my eyes to look at. I really doubt how anyone could really defend it. No, Ninjastar, it runs at 24 frames per second in order to feel more cinematic. God, Pokemon fans would honestly say that. Gotta do whatever it takes to defend the game that performs like a PlayStation Vita port of itself, I guess. As much as I like Area 1, there are parts of the game that look absolutely abysmal. Cobalt Coastlands was already mentioned by Jeff, but seriously, look over any of the cliffs at the islands below and your jaw will drop. That's just how low res they look. This begins to raise questions as to why the game allows you to enter a first person mode if there isn't any beauty to observe. It even has gyro aiming support, although I guess you're supposed to use it to look at your Pokemon up close, which I admit is actually super cute. Why even have wide open areas if they're going to look this bad? They should be funneling the player through caves or something so they can focus on making smaller sections of the map that they can spend more time on. What? You have to be kidding me. It's a cave! How do you mess that up? They made it a literal square! A square! You would think that making a cave look good wouldn't be that hard. The hell, even the Sword and Shield caves looked better than the caves in this game. And you know how much it hurts me to say anything nice about that game. But yeah, as a whole, this game certainly isn't going to blow anyone away graphically when games like Xenoblade 3 and Kirby and Forgotten Land exist on the same hardware. I just wanted to show some appreciation for what little improvements they did make.
What's best about Pokemon Legends Arceus, and the reason this was my favorite Pokemon game since at least Heart Gold and Soul Silver, are the many quality of life improvements. Like for instance, now instead of your Pokemon evolving automatically, you instead can choose to evolve them from the menu. This was likely implemented because the game wants you to play with more than 6 Pokemon and be evolving them frequently, so having them evolve automatically would really slow down the pace of the game. You still gotta watch this unskippable cutscene with very questionable lighting, but hey, it's up to you now, it's your choice. The menus are also where you can change the name of your Pokemon. Again, in the old days, you'd catch a Pokemon and have to wait a bit and then name it on the spot. The way Pokemon used to work wasn't bad, but this just feels so much smoother. It's a lot quicker and snappier, and you don't have to go to some hack in the middle of nowhere. And on a similar note, the move tutors are gone. You can literally just change moves on the fly. Like, how is this not talked about more? This is great. In the old games, even as far back as Sword and Shield, I think, you'd have to go to specific people to do so. It's such a pain. There's stuff like being able to get your Pokemon from storage without having to go all the way back, as I mentioned earlier, but there's also side quests where if someone asks for a Pokemon, you can choose it from the box right then and there. These may seem like normal gaming conventions, but for a franchise like Pokemon that's super ancient, it's really great. And overall, you can mass release Pokemon when you're at your pasture and even get rewarded for it with Grit Rocks. There's even a search function. You can't just search a word for some reason. You have to choose letter by letter, and it doesn't even take you to where the Pokemon is. It kind of just grays out the rest of them. So it's kind of annoying, but you know what? It's still a step forward. I do think some of the changes aren't really that big of a deal, but it speaks to a greater problem that Pokemon has instead. It's mostly relying on game design elements from the 90s. The problems with Sword and Shield, like the graphics and the Pokedex, sure, those are annoying as well, but more so what bothered me in that game was how goddamn repetitive and boring Pokemon was getting. I don't care about the open area. The rest of the game is incredibly linear, and it still feels like a game made 20 years ago. Obviously, Sword and Shield has a few quality of life improvements, sure, but Pokemon Legends Arceus, despite being in, ironically, the caveman era of Pokemon, feels like the most modern Pokemon game of all time. The text box speed is even automatically set to the fastest option. All kids growing up, that's the first thing we all used to do, but here, while it might be a small thing, it's proof that the developers truly cared about their fan base here. And I will say, Generation 9 is at least taking some of this. The name and move changes are now on the fly as well, so I'll give them credit for that, but as Gen 9 and even Gen 10 comes out, even if they don't make another Legends game, it's important not to forget where Pokemon's latest and greatest strides truly came from. It was Pokemon Channel. Another huge quality of life improvement comes in the upgraded effort level system. Now, this system in the old games is super complicated, so I'm gonna sit you down, let's talk about it. Just kidding, I have no clue how it works either. I've never been a competitive player, so it never mattered to me, but basically, effort levels are a whole in-depth method of raising your stats that required Pokemon breeding and natures and stuff. It was really something designed for the absolute hardcore players, and not something they ever really explained or designed the game in mind with. Legends Arceus, they made the system and effort level manipulation a bit more simple, but doable with none other than the Grit Rocks you find from defeating Pokemon and releasing them from your pasture. There are 4 tiers of grits to get your stats up to 10. I don't know how the old competitive scene feels about this, probably mad, but as a casual longtime fan of Pokemon, I appreciated having this dumbed down for me. It also provides the player a more serviceable way to spend time and nurture the creatures you catch along the way. There are also the mints that you could farm that change the nature of your Pokemon. By far, my favorite quality of life change stems from the fact that this is the first Pokemon game I have ever played where getting all the Pokemon is doable in the base game. For one, there's only one version. I felt like the 2-version scheme was outdated in the franchise for the longest time now. It was time for it to go. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl literally were the same build of the same game. Each copy just had like a code that slightly changed things. And Sword and Shield, before the DLC at least, really had no reason to be 2 games. Like, oh, 2 gym leaders are different. Here's another $60, Game Freak. Unironically, there are people who say that, I don't get it. So the fact that this game didn't gatekeep Pokemon behind basically a paywall or having friends was a huge deal to me. And Pokemon that usually needed to be traded to evolve to their final form now have items in game that work as their evolution method. Because I hated as a kid playing Ruby and Sapphire and just going into Victory Road with my Graveler and Machoke because I had no friends who played video games as a kid, and and no friends also, but still. And I get nowadays it's a lot easier to trade with the advent of online gaming, but there's something comforting about knowing you can truly sit down and complete your Pokédex without having to connect to someone's game or constantly be online. These changes made me feel like Pokemon Legends Arceus was made with the player in mind and not just a blatant cash grab. So when Gen 9 rolled around and Scarlet and Violet was back to 2 versions and version exclusive Pokemon, I couldn't help but feel that was just a huge step backwards to the franchise. I truly mean it. You can get every Pokemon, at least that count for the Pokédex, in Legends Arceus. You can even get the starters in the post-game, either by talking to the professor or they'll just start showing up in the Distortions. And this was quite literally absolutely unheard of as a kid.
Throughout the adventure though, you'll have Jubilife Village as kind of a hub world before you go on your excursions. There's a lot of buildings here and a lot of NPCs, some of which will give you various quests. In fact, I would argue most of the quests come from this area. There is Ginter and Thule who sell you special items. Thule just sells you garbage, but Ginter will sell you really unique items, such as furniture that customizes the special Pokemon, Rotom, and also evolution stones. He used to only have one item for sale, but because of the most recent update, he does sell free now, so that's good. There's a few stores here too. You got your basic goods store, which opens up more items if you do a few side quests. It also gives the store at your camp more items too, so it's worth your time. There's a photography studio. Yep, they totally had photographs thousands of years ago, sure. All jokes aside, it's a nice little feature. It kind of brings back at least some elements of contest seen in the old games. But you know, I'm not going to critique something that was clearly just added as a little fan service. Samoa has a shop here too, and her shop is actually fairly unique, as she doesn't take money, like a normal store would, but instead merit points, which you get by picking up people's statues throughout Hisui. As a reward, you can get some pretty good items here, and it's a really reliable way to obtain the evolution stones.
There's an old lady in the corner that some players probably didn't know existed. Honestly, if you're one of them, I'm sorry. She sells what are called charms, not to be confused with, you know, the character in this game named Charm. Okay, cut to the point. The warding charm gives resistance to potential status ailments that bullies on the field can inflict on you. The survival charm gives you a better chance of not fainting, which can be helpful if you're a klutz like me and almost jump off the cliffs just trying to walk around. The tempting charm means that when you faint, that it'll protect your items from disappearing from your bag, which is personally my favorite, so I always walk around with a few of them. Of course, these come with the downside of the extra money and storage space, but I think they have enough of a purpose to warrant a few slots in your bag.
Since this is a modern Pokemon game, let's talk about a feature that is usually done quite well, the customization. Despite many problems, probably the best aspect of Sword and Shield was actually the character customization. Game Freak are really good at making good looking character models above anything else, and there is a good amount of variety in the length and designs on the shirts. There are t-shirts and button-ups and ripped shirts, and you get the point. There are many jackets, gloves, shoes, backpacks, and pretty much all other basic clothing options you can expect, and the options that are available are actually really fantastic, all things considered. Ignoring the gym outfits that you can't wear in the gyms themselves, really cool that I bought one for 18,000 whole Pokédollars, Game Freak, you piece of sh**. Arceus is in a unique position since it takes place in ancient Sinnoh, so all of the modern clothing that's normally available won't be available, aside from the outfit you start the game with. In this game, rather than t-shirts, you have kimonos to select from. There was also very limited hat selections, since there are many more headband types to select from this time around. I really appreciate the more era-appropriate attire, since it gives the player a different look than you're used to in a typical Pokemon game. Unfortunately, this comes at the cost of the options that are available. Since the clothing cannot have logos on it, and jackets and gloves are an option, this means that there are essentially only 3 to 5 different outfit templates per category, with the options mainly just being different colors, and that's it. This is way more apparent early in the game, since you unlock more clothing and hairstyles with story progress, which is a double-edged sword even if it does add some noticeable progression to your playthrough. You can still very easily make a character that looks good, to be fair, but the result is going to be significantly less unique to the player. This issue also extends to the hair options, which feel pretty limited even after completing the game. There are also gender-exclusive hairstyles, which just compounds the issue even further than it really needed to. Also, the game will charge you for a haircut before you even see what the options are, which is pretty illogical when you think about it. Freaking con artist, I swear. I hope you lose your locks. If you give Mr. Bullcut here some specific Pokemon, you'll be able to open up more harvest. I always kind of forget about this when I'm playing this game. It's not super necessary, but you can spawn berries, specific items for crafting, and mints. Mints change your Pokemon's nature. Gee, that's sure helpful since this game has basically no competitive battling. I guess you can transfer your Pokemon to Pokemon Home if you really want to support that scam. Ilka? More like ill-conceived. Speaking of competitive battling, here are the training grounds. an area of the game where you can buy new moves for your Pokemon, which unlike Bible TMs from previous games, you can equip the moves from the pause menu at any time. You can also use a Seat of Mastery to, well, master a move. It just translates to the respective move being able to utilize the Agile and Strength system, which is pretty nifty. You can also trade items to get free Grit Rocks, which is probably really useful to somebody, but I personally found plenty while playing normally, so I never cared. Lastly, you can battle people in the training ground, which I had nothing to add to that, like it's just battling. On the outskirts of Jubilife Village, there's a guide that allows you to play a minigame where you pop balloons with Pokeballs. It's your typical shooting gallery that you've seen in many ever games, although in this minigame you can actually walk around, which actually confused me at first and I ended up getting only 8,000 points, which got me the prize of free mud balls. Listen here, you don't have to rub it in. The first goal of this minigame is to get more than 10,000 points, which is really easy to do in practice. Alright, I'm getting a prize fit for a champion. Getting past 10,000 points will complete one of the side quests and get you some pretty average rewards, so it's worth doing for the extra Poké Dollars above anything else. The score requirement is also ever increasing for more rewards, so it's fine enough as a little side mode. That being said, I doubt that this really improves your accuracy that much. Other than that, this is your basic RPG hub world. What really bothers me is this house by the Prelude Beach, and yes, that's what they actually call it. But who the hell even lives here?
In general, I love Jubilife Village. It's one of my favorite parts of the entire game. Here's where you interact with this game's robust cast of characters and villagers, and lots of them even give you some side quests. Some of these side quests will actually grow the stores and functions of the village, making them more than worth your time. A lot of them are a bit basic in functionality, such as showing a Pokemon to them or a completed Pokedex, but you do get some decent rewards for doing them. So they're monotonous at worst and a really nice side distraction at best. Okay, real quick tip for this guy: everyone who can't catch a big enough Weasel for him, don't even bother. Wait until you beat that area and come back and grind to get an alpha for a guaranteed big size. I've seen enough people descend into madness trying to catch that Weasel normally. Don't be that person. Overall, though, it's really fascinating to see Jubilife Village grow and develop. As cheesy as it sounds, you grow as a player with it. The music even gets more instrumentation as the game goes on, and it really helps with the immersion and a reminder that the villagers of Jubilife are a growing society. I talked about this a bit with Luigi's Mansion as well, but it's also really helpful to have some peaceful music in an area as a contrast to the areas where you can get killed by a frickin' Wurmple. Unfortunately, though, I feel as if Jubilife Village is the best this game has to offer in terms of music. Sure, there's a few absolute banger boss themes and one-offs, but in terms of the actual overworld music, it's really odd to me how they did it, because it doesn't always play, so it's kind of like dead quiet sometimes, and then sometimes all of a sudden a song comes on, and oftentimes it's pretty good, and then it's just dead quiet. You see what I mean? It's almost like the audio designers just couldn't make up their mind if they wanted to be a Breath of the Wild soundtrack as in basically nothing, or a more normal Pokemon route. A lot of the music that does play, as I mentioned earlier, are based off of the Sinnoh tracks. Actually, the Jubilife Village theme at the very end of the game even sounds exactly like Jubilife City from Diamond and Pearl, something I didn't notice until a repeat playthrough. Like, it's such a cool detail. But while the music itself can be a bit, I don't want to say hit or miss, but like on and off, the sound design itself is phenomenal. It's better than the music in my opinion. And where do I even begin? I think my absolute favorite is the sounds that you hear when catching Pokemon. If you're too far off, you hear a bonk sound effect. But if you catch a Pokemon, and especially off guard, you get a really gratifying noise. And then feel bad, because you just gave this cute little bird a concussion, so maybe it's not that good. When you get a Pokemon, you get this little sizzle noise. The whole sound design is just so good at immersing you and making you feel accomplished when you do play well. And just in general, in terms of sound design, it definitely doesn't stop there. There are echoes in the caves and Pokemon cries throughout the map. There's the shiny sound effect, which lets you know when a shiny Pokemon spawns. They got rid of this in Scarlet and Violet, despite it being a beloved feature. I don't understand my life either. Everything fits so well in this environment. When you get an item, it's a charming little piano riff. Wait a minute, this is just Breath of the Wild. Sonic Frontiers also does this. I'm gushing here, but how can I not? These little things, in my opinion, increase the immersion so much in this game, so despite just looking small, it's genuinely one of the best aspects of the entire game, and pure genius. Once you defeat the 5 nobles, the distortion in the sky grows, the sky turns purple in a Super Paper Mario type of moment, and then everyone kicks you out of the village! What the f*** is happening here? You guys are kicking me out? I literally have been dedicating my goddamn life for all of you! Hey, don't blame me, you jerk! I bought the 5 noble Pokemon, and I'm 10 years old. What have you done for this village? With your life? What did you do besides just standing around and looking pretty? You are all just a bunch of ungrateful... Okay, fine, I get it. One small touch is that during this exile chapter, you lose your trainer card that you had previously, which was shown on the save screen. Man, way to rub it in. Well, we end up at a very hidden house in the middle of nowhere, where we meet with who is very clearly supposed to be a Cynthia ancestor. Johnny is also supposed to be one, but we'll talk about him more later. I've mentioned this a few times throughout the video, but there are a lot of Sinnoh ancestors in this game that are supposed to be references to characters that we saw throughout Gen 4. Most of them are just the gym leaders, but there are quite a few of them. One in particular that's fascinating is not a reference to the 4th generation, but Pokemon Black 2 and Pokemon White 2. This character, Ingo, apparently was sent back in time to be here, meaning that canonically, this isn't just a cheeky Easter egg or anything. This is the genuine character from Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, which I guess that makes PLA canon by technicality, which makes me happy as a fan of this game. It's super interesting, honestly. Also, time travel is confirmed in Pokemon, although I'm sure with the anime and stuff it probably already was, but now it's more canon. Besides Ingo, I found when doing my research, there's a few ancestors from later generations as well, such as this kid who has the same hat as Clayton.
Yep, father and son right there. I mean, come on, they have the same hat, guys.
The rest of these guys, yeah, I mean, there's not that much going on, but it's a nice reward for those who play Generation 4 nonetheless. Our avatars are supposed to also be references to those games, but like, duh, I thought that was the whole point. Back to the Cynthia household, we have to choose a side between the Diamond and Pearl clan, where most of the people playing this game probably chose Irida, because, well, gamers are down bad. Whoever you choose of the two then takes you to see the 3 Lake Guardians, who make you fight alpha Pokemon. Hey, I know you! You're the Pokemon that ruined my goddamn childhood! This gets you the red chain, and then we try to meet up with Commander Kamado, who's trying to take care of either Dialga or Palkia, who spawned from a space-time rift. We fight him because he's a complete wimp! I lost a lot of times. This fight's actually pretty hard, I'm just kidding. And looking at him now, it's pretty clear that this is supposed to be Professor Rowan from Generation 4. Damn. Took him like 2,000 years to get gray hairs. You're doing something right, man. After that, we're tasked with catching Palkia, who I caught in one Ultra Ball because I'm just a gamer. I think it's supposed to happen like that. If you choose Irida, you catch Palkia, and if you choose Adaman, you get to catch Dialga. It doesn't actually matter that much because you can catch the other one a bit later, so don't stress too much if you care about completing the Pokedex. You think the game would just end here by getting into the next fight right away since you're all pumped up like I was and ready. But after that, we actually just leave this area and do a few more side quests before actually fighting. I don't know, this breaks up the pace of the game. I'm not big on this section. One of these fights is against the Misfortunes. Get it? Because, yeah, it's not that funny. I guess I haven't talked about them up to this point because they're super forgettable. Unfortunately, that's how you do a pun. Unfortunately, I would compare them most to something like the standard Pokemon team that's always trying to do evil and stop you. More so like a later generation one, like Team Yell. Those guys suck. If I'm feeling really Breath of the Wildy, I'd compare them to the Yiga clan because they often just stop you in the middle of nowhere in post-game. But that's kind of a stretch. Don't raise the counter. Actually, screw it, just add it. They're charming side characters nonetheless, nothing too bad. This kind of brings me to my next point. Why are we fighting against teenagers when a giant god Pokemon is trying to end the Earth? I mean, basically, we're trying to collect the materials for a specific Pokeball, the Origin Ball, that is the only one that can catch Dialga. But it's like, we go up to the top, have some gamer Pokemon battles, then we go back down, do some fetch quests, and then go back up. Kind of just breaks up the pace. I get why it happens for the story, but it's kind of weird. I think it should have just ended in that first half. But hey, a 20-hour campaign sounds better than a 19-hour one, now doesn't it? You also have to bring Palkia up in order to access the final fight, and this is going to be, of course, the opposite of your decision later. God damn it, I didn't plan to have a 7th teammate. I gotta name him. Okay, Palkia is a god, and I ran a community poll figuring out the best Pikmin, and it ended up being Bulbmin, because Bulbmin are the best Pikmin and what God intended for us. So therefore, I'm naming Palkia Bulbmin. It's science. Don't fight me on it. I do not want to hear anyone questioning me. You catch Dialga, and the void in the sky disappears. Happy ending, boom. I'm literally 10, and I saved the world more than any of you did. Ha ha ha! And that's the game. Except it's not. We got a post-game just like most Pokemon games. Not Sword and Shield, but we get one here. And a lot changes here. To start, there was one collectible I neglected during our main playthrough of Legends Arceus. These are the elemental plates, and they are key items, so not really a true collectible. There's one for each Pokemon type, each one being rumored to change the type of a specific Pokemon. Gee, I wonder whoever that could be. I don't know. So, the post-game revolves around finding those missing plates, which is often done by hunting down and catching legendary Pokemon, and killing an alpha Vespiquen because they probably couldn't figure out where to fit the bug plate in, let's be honest. Actually, even starting the fight with at least a few of these legendaries can be a bit more tricky than most of the legendaries throughout the game. Heatran has you throw mud at him, because mud is obviously the key to taking down ancient legends of Sinnoh history, and Cresselia makes you dizzy. Fun fact about Cresselia, or not so fun fact, rather, in the original build of the game, if you went to see her first without talking to the NPCs in the front of the area, the game soft locks you out from finishing the post game. But thankfully, the team team did eventually patch that. A minor fix also in this same patch was a glitch where the Pokemon Cherrim would spawn from trees but would be impossible to catch.
Now, how do I know about this, you might ask? Well, I was actually one of the unlucky few who did get a Cherrim coming out of a tree at night or something, and I would just throw Pokeball and Pokeball and Pokeball, and it would not catch. And I just thought I had some extremely unlucky luck.
There's a few optional things too, like battles with Adamant and Irida, which lets you get some globes to unlock the special Dialga and Palkia forms, and money. Really, I just like the money, honestly. Also, now throughout the map, this is when the Misfortune Sisters will be sitting around and waiting for someone, they're waiting for you, to run into their path so they can try to take you down with their one singular Pokemon. Really, you guys have nothing else to do? The rewards for beating the Misfortunes are super worth it though, as in they drop a lot of money. You will pay for this! Okay, I guess I'll pay for it with the sheer gold you left on the ground, sucker. There are also some changes to Jubilife once you beat the game, like this EXP candy shop. This is pretty interesting for Pokemon, showing the franchise was still open to evolution once the adventure was over, as I don't think you could ever just buy EXP before. Although, since you have to evolve Pokemon a lot to complete your Pokedex, it makes a lot more sense here. Back to the legendaries, you also have to seek out the 3 Lake Pokemon and Regigigas. Once you get all the plates, Johnny gets excited about being close to figuring out the Puzzle of Sinnoh and has us go back to where we fought Dialga and Palkia. And okay, Johnny has officially lost his marbles and is cosplaying Arceus himself.
Now hand over the plates you've gathered. I'll be the one to bring them all together.
The fight against Volo might be one of the most difficult moments in modern Pokemon. You can't mess around here. He has a team of 6 Pokemon, but also gets a second phase that has 2 forms of a Giratina. You don't get to heal though in between phases, and there's no checkpoints.
Giratina, strike him down.
And you know what? This fight is really cool. We have a character who turned on us. We have this epic music playing. It's one of the best moments in modern Pokemon. But you know what? Some people don't like playing against 8 Pokemon. Some people don't like having all their attacks miss due to random luck. Some people don't like watching the same cuts. I'm talking about me, okay?
I like using my team till the very end in Pokemon, but I just could not win with mine. So I swapped to a team of legendaries and alphas because I had no shot of winning unless I did. Some people might say that's cheap, and to that I'd say maybe, but you know what? The game doesn't play fair. I'm not playing fair either. He gets 8 Pokemon, and your moves always seem to miss at the worst possible moment. And even though I'm a higher level, his attacks do way more than me. This fight is the type of gaming moment that will kick you in the Pokeballs, make you a tough gamer. But you know what? If there's any positive to this fight, it does bring back some much needed challenge to the Pokemon franchise.
Now, the issue with the legendary strategy is that because you are not using the grit rocks on them throughout the game, their stats are ultimately not going to be that strong. So it's like, I can't use my legendaries, I can't use my normal team. What am I supposed to do here?
And you know what adds insult to injury here? Not only does it not have checkpoints, you also have to mash through at least most of the text again. And when you get to the Giratina phase, you have to watch a cutscene that takes 2 minutes long to sit through.
First, it's really cool and exciting. By the end, you just feel like you're being taunted.
Even when I got to Giratina phase with 4 remaining Pokemon, I had no chance. Giratina is so strong, and yes, I get it, it's a legendary Pokemon, but my Pokemon are legendaries too, so that's a double standard, and they get stomped like level 5 freaking Bidoofs. It's a goddamn joke. Pokemon that are supposed to be the gods of time and space get shit on like a magic card. Frick you, Johnny, you Miss Pac-Man loving punk! You finally won. Really? Are they making fun of me? Like, they could have just wrote, you won, but some game designer knew this fight was a real shitter and added the word finally. Fuck you.
And that's the post-game. In short, PLA, nope, just kidding. We have even more. There's like a post-game in this game. Probably to make up for the fact that Sword and Shield had no post-game period.
Once you beat Giratina, the goal is to meet Arceus, who after the first credit sequence, presumably is the one instructing you to meet all the Pokemon. Thankfully, we only need to catch one of each Pokemon. It doesn't mean that you need to complete their research entries. Although keep in mind, this does mean getting all the Wisps, because that's the only way you can meet Spiritomb, but thankfully that doesn't mean we have to catch all the unknowns. In terms of new Pokemon that appear from the Volo fight, there's 3 Weather Genie Pokemon that roam the map after defeating Volo, coming out at specific weather conditions. These are the Weather Trio, introduced in Generation 5, and again, I really love that they cared about throwing in some Pokemon Black and White love in this game too. These Pokemon are very challenging to catch, I would argue the hardest by far, but also a good test of skill. If Volo was designed to see if you've mastered the battles, the Weather Genies are designed to see if you've mastered how they play in the field. They move super quick, making Sonic the Hedgehog look bad. There's many strategies you can try to use to catch them. The only way I know about that works is buying dozens and dozens of smoke bombs, sneak up on them, and then throw Pokeballs until their shield breaks. The only problem with this strategy is I accidentally would throw one extra Pokeball too often before I could send a Pokemon to battle, meaning I would try to catch them with just a single Pokeball. Once you catch the Weather Trio, one more Pokemon spawns, and this is an all-new Pokemon named Anemoris. She's the Pokemon of love. Yeah, well, I'm not feeling the love right now, making me sneak through a swamp and dodge alpha Pokemon. Shh, leave me alone. I'm trying to do something here. Be cool. Be cool. Don't get us caught. Also, returning to the turnback cave after the Volo fight lets you catch Giratina now, which is way easier than the actual fight, and suddenly his attacks missed. It really is a turnback. This only convinces me that they made the Volo fight way harder than it needed to be artificially, because this was like embarrassingly easy. Take that, I guess.
Okay, so earlier, Jeff lied. Technically, you need some external stuff to catch every Pokemon in the game. Sorta. So, Shaman and Darkrai are in Pokemon Legends Arceus, but they don't count for the Pokedex, or your ability to get the true ending of catching Arceus. So, I don't know, that's kind of a gray area. Either way, what makes these 2 Pokemon special to the point that they don't count for the Pokedex? Well, in order to catch them, you need to complete a side quest related to each Pokemon. But the catch is that each of the 2 side quests requires owning a previous Pokemon release.
So if you happen to own both this pile of vomit and this piece of shit, you can mix the 2 together.
Darkrai requires having save data for Brilliant Diamond or Shining Pearl, and Shaman requires having save data for either Sword or Shield. It's a huge shame that they resorted to locking off Pokemon with this method. Like, sure, the Pokemon are required for 100%, but I'm not sure a Pokemon fanatic, then you most likely would have skipped at least 1 to 2 games. Brilliant Diamond released 2 months before Arceus, for example, so I imagine if you were planning on buying Arceus, then you definitely would have skipped that copy and pasted remake. So if you want Darkrai, then you're out of luck. Moving past that, the quests for each of the Pokemon themselves are pretty underwhelming. The Shaman quest just requires you to talk to a Diamond Clair member in Area 1, who recalls seeing a mysterious Pokemon in a field of flowers. You then walk a very short distance to a field of dead flowers, where a cutscene shows the dead flowers becoming alive again in order to spawn a Shaman. The NPC then just tells you to do whatever you need to do for your research, and walks away. Once you catch Shaman, then the quest ends. Now, Shaman being level 70 sounds really intimidating, but all it really means is that you can't just throw a basic Pokeball and catch it. Since this is a post-game quest, as long as you've trained your Pokemon correctly, then battling Shaman down to low health and throwing an Ultra Ball should be enough to do the job. The main issue you might come across is that if Shaman runs away, since it never respawns, then you have to leave and reload the whole map just to get another chance, which is both cryptic and annoying. I have to give Game Freak some credit, that quest really lives up to Sword and Shield's underwhelming legacy. Really glad I spent $60 for a cutscene and some damn flowers, you guys. Interestingly enough though, Darkrai and Shaman aren't the only 2 Pokemon who aren't required for the Pokedex. There's also Manaphy and Fion, which kind of requires Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, as you find them in a book in the library there. But guess what? We have the internet. 1 point for society in 2022. It's really cryptic, but basically you have to get a very specific team of Pokemon, one of which is Overquill, which is an absolute pain to evolve. Then you go through these rocks at sundown and it opens a cave. I kind of like the idea of this being a pretty hidden quest, like it's cool and all, but the fact that it's locked behind another game is kind of feels icky.
There's one legendary left for us, and as said, to meet them, we're tasked with catching all the Pokemon in the Pokedex. This is no easy feat and will take many hours of grinding. And some of these last few Pokemon can really take up a lot of your time. Raising an Espeon means increasing an Eevee's friendship, but if it has a fairy move, then it evolves into Sylveon. Well, that sucks. Would have been nice to know before I wasted my time. A lot of these last few Pokemon I caught needed evolutionary stones. These aren't the easiest to find in my experience. Some side quests do give you them at a minimum, but besides that, your easiest option is buying them from this store that sells you items depending on how many MP or merit points you have. Throughout the map, there are little satchels that are supposed to be where a trainer had previously died. I play my Switch offline most of the time, but this does typically connect to the internet and is one-for-one with other players' experiences, and this is a nice but fairly unreliable way to get your dropped items back. Thankfully, they have satchels of random players if you play offline though. This lady doesn't sell all of the items you need though. Ursaring needs a peat block to evolve into Ursaluna. The only reliable way I was able to find one was completing a chain of 5 side quests where you're tasked with saving Wanda, who has a tendency to wander off. What is with all these puns? Like, get it? Her name is Wander. It's not... It's kind of funny, actually. Even then, you still can't evolve Ursaring. You need to wait until a full moon hits. It's a unique way to evolve it, but this whole sequence of events for one Pokemon really is a ton of extra effort. But when you finally do so, you face off with Arceus himself, and this is so amazing. It's not an easy fight, but let me just take a minute and say, as a kid, this would have blown my mind. Arceus used to just be, well, what the title of this game is, an ancient legend, as there was only one possible event in the United States prior to catching Arceus legitimately in like 2009 or something. Me and my friends always talked about it, and eventually we just used action replay to even think about catching Arceus, or hell, half the legendaries that previously used to require events. So the fact that they carved a whole dedicated fight, nonetheless being a reward for completing the Pokedex, and with a whole beautiful scene and background with the god of the Pokemon universe, who used to just be as much of a mystery in real life as the people in this game treat him, it's truly something special and one of my absolute favorite things the Pokemon team has ever done. This game wasn't just nostalgia pandering, it continues our nostalgia. While you might think most of the content ends here, well, February 2022 would take us in a slightly different direction. It was time for a Pokemon Presents, and I personally could not wait, having spent 100+ hours on PLA in that month. Would they be announcing new areas, an expansion pass maybe? Was this game going to be supported for another year? Oh, I was even hoping they would add more Pokemon. My hopes were running wild, man. Instead, and this broke my heart, we got news about a new Pokemon game, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which, don't get me wrong, the game looked good and I know a lot of fans were excited. But what about the game you guys had just released a month prior? Scarlet and Violet's reveal seemed to improve the franchise in a few aspects. For one, the graphics, especially the Pokemon textures, were way better than PLA. Still not great, but at a very minimum, acceptable. But it seemed to be taking steps back. There were 2 versions again, and there was none of the snappiness of catching Pokemon in the wild to be seen, even if this game is a lot more open world than PLA was. But as a last hurrah to PLA, we did get one more update, so let's check it out. I threw it in the trash after the bullet fight, because I was mad. Let's play. You've heard about the mass outbreaks by now if you've played Legends Arceus, but I introduce you to massive mass outbreaks. Basically, with this update, after completing a specific quest, the mass outbreaks sometimes will have alpha Pokemon. It's a lot more rare, only appearing in specific conditions, and there are even a few quests regarding this. These are fine. Each area just has you go investigate why there are so many mass outbreaks in this area, and it adds a decent little bit to the game and makes it a little more replayable. Nothing insane, but a nice little addition. One worthwhile addition here is the Path of Tenacity challenge and the Path of Solitude challenges. These are a pretty nice addition since battling was definitely one of the weaker aspects of PLA. But what's even better than all this is the Eternal Battle oh my god, I'm gonna get blasted for that pronunciation, I don't know. Which is basically this game's version of the Battle Tower. Yeah, that mode in Generation 3 that fans never shut up about. And there's a few more things. You can grow new berries as a harvest. That's exciting. You can play one more balloon race. Okay, please. The NPCs take photos with you in the okay, Game Freak, is that really all you're gonna add to this? Oh no. On its own, the Daybreak update is a good addition, but in the face of no other DLC for this game, it's underwhelming. This is the type of update we should have gotten along the way to an even bigger update. What's this portion of the map here that we literally can't access? Why not just have more Pokemon? Like, I don't really care about the alphas, to be honest. Yes, the upgrades we did get are great and a nice addition, but it's a bonus. It's not a genuine expansion, and yeah, it's pretty obvious that the teams abandoned ship on this game due to Scarlet and Violet. Pokemon Legends Arceus, whether you like it or not, is a mainline game. It was officially confirmed by the team to be one, yet it came out in January, 2 months after Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, the weaker Pokemon games, which got the yearly holiday slot, and PLA wasn't even given a month before Gen 9's announcement. Were they embarrassed of this game or something? Did they think no one would like the product that they grinded to make? It feels like they had no faith in it. Like, Sword and Shield got 2 new DLC scenarios. Sure, it sucked they were on separate games, but they existed. They did put in the effort. PLA got a little pat on the back. They said, sorry, you're getting sent off to fucking die.
I personally think that Generation 9 was in development alongside Arceus, or at least by 2 separate divisions of Game Freak at the same time, seeing as they both take a more open approach to the series. Although the differences between the Legends and the new generation are big enough for me to believe that the studios didn't take that much from each other. The more gallerying example is how Scarlet and Violet is completely open world as opposed to the multiple segmented areas in Arceus. Plus, it's pretty clear that Generation 9 was a much bigger priority since the graphics are a lot less rushed, and obviously the marketing push was much greater, even if the frame rate was much lower. Details like the real-time catching of Arceus being completely gone, and the battle system not adopting the strong and agile system, which I personally thought was a substantial improvement to the series, makes me believe that Scarlet and Violet were completely independent projects. Although I get proven wrong when I play the game, since there is some overlap like mass outbreaks being retained, which just raises more questions. It feels really odd that they wouldn't take the mechanics that drastically improved the gameplay loop of the franchise into account with the next big generation refresh. Sure, they added passive battling so you don't have to stop and fight every Pokemon here, but catching is still going to be a huge headache at the end of the day. And when catching is the whole point of the game for a lot of people, I can imagine it being a huge disappointment for some fans, like me. Like, sure, you could argue that there would be no reason to battle at that point, then the whole gameplay loop becomes shallow, but they could just circumvent this by having your Pokemon gain the less XP when you fight Pokemon in passive battles, which they do. They could also just reward more XP by clearing the research tasks and have them include more battling based tasks in order to encourage the player to engage in more regular fights with wild Pokemon. This would make the passive battle something you would use while trying to explore to find hidden collectibles, and normal battles can be saved for Pokemon grinding. Unless they didn't have the time to add it in, which is what I believe happened, or at least I hoped happened. But then when you play Scarlet and Violet, the game does have a Pokeball throwing mechanic, but it's just for catching airborne Pokemon. It does this really awkward homing animation instead of just letting the player aim it for themselves, which just looks wrong. You guys had the code to make this mechanic not look like garbage, but whatever. At the end of the day, I really just don't want to see the series go backwards in innovation with future games again. So I'm hoping that Generation 10 combines the new concepts into something truly innovative.
Pokemon Legends Arceus is the game that I wanted Generation 9 to be. Listen, I was a huge Pokemon fan as a kid, and a part of me will always be one, and that's why I get so critical and passionate about the issues I currently see in the franchise. I played Gen 3, loved it. Played Gen 4, Gen 5, loved them to death, but at a certain point, it doesn't matter how good, the same gameplay, the same formula, it just grows stale. I know a lot of people still love Gen 6, Gen 7, and even 8. I can respect that opinion, absolutely, but I'm going to tell you my experience with these games now. I didn't enjoy them. To be fair, I didn't get around to Gen 6, in part because I was burnt on the formula, so take that out, but playing Gen 7 was, in my opinion, really boring, mainly due to all the tutorials and slow start of the game, and I never made it that far after that. I only played about halfway in before saying this wasn't worth my time. I just wasn't having fun in the slightest. Pokemon Sword and Shield was the moment I realized Pokemon couldn't keep going on this way. I was mystified that my favorite franchises like Zelda and Mario were setting out to innovate on the Switch, but Sword and Shield had not evolved the franchise in any notable regards, minus the wild area, which worked so poorly that it's almost not worth mentioning. I give it to Pokemon the franchise. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl ultimately got really mediocre remakes, and it just didn't seem like the franchise was going anywhere that excited me. Felt like it was more of a cash grab meant to meet yearly release slots, which ultimately it is. So when Pokemon Legends Arceus was released, it was mind-blowing to me. I get that the game has problems. I'm not sitting here and telling you it's perfect, because it's absolutely not. The graphics are an embarrassment to the company, there's a lot of text mashing, and a few ideas here that don't quite work. When I'm sitting here praising Legends Arceus, it's not to convince you it's a flawless experience. Late into the production of this video, this game was announced as a potential RPG of the Year contender against games like Xenoblade 3 and Elden Ring, and I thought that was ridiculous. Wait, Elden Ring's an RPG? My ass is an RPG. My point is, I love PLA and I still don't even think that should have been on the list. I'm not trying to just pump this game up. I am not blind to the problems it currently has. Rather, I'm trying to explain that Legends Arceus was the evolution in the franchise I always was looking for. It felt like a game that was released in 2022. Okay, maybe like 2018 or something, but progress nonetheless. The quality of life features, the single release, letting you catch all the Pokemon in one file, and the snappy, real-time action gameplay, the change of tone, the change of gameplay that immersed you in this world. I could go on. These were the things that broke the pattern of monotony that I felt deeply with Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield, and they even gave it a genuine post-game, something I loved about Gen 4 and 5 that was missing from the later entries in the series. I get that we treat the Breath of the Wild comparison like a meme, but to me and to many, this was the Breath of the Wild of Pokemon. It reinvented the series. It showed to me that Game Freak was above always just doing the status quo and the bare minimum, and I personally couldn't wait for the future. Which is why the fact they dumped it in 2 months and took a few steps back in Scarlet and Violet is just such a bummer. I said it in the title, I've said it a few times in this video, I'll say it once again. Pokemon Legends Arceus is what I wanted and expected out of a Gen 9. While Scarlet and Violet definitely take some steps in that right direction and some things from Arceus, I just can't see it as more of an evolution than Legends Arceus was. It feels like better versions of Sword and Shield rather than a better version of Pokemon Legends Arceus. And while the game will be good, and that's fine for a lot of people, for me, because the series has felt so stale, I don't want a return to that older formula. This video, again, is not shitting on those games, as much as it's more so praising Legends Arceus. As a Pokemon fan, I'm kind of just frustrated. The Pokemon game of my dreams was released, and it feels like even Pokemon fans have moved on from it in favor of kind of a step back, even if it's a slight one. And Game Freak, you never gave it a goddamn chance. Sword and Shield, much less critically acclaimed games, got 2 expansion passes, and why did Legends Arceus just not even receive close to that treatment? Where does this leave Legends Arceus? Will this game be a footnote in Pokemon history? Will there ever be another Legends game? From what I've seen of Gen 9, there are still a few quality of life improvements. Pokemon Now Auto Battle, that's cool. There's still Pokemon that let you traverse like the Rideable Pokemon did. Battles take place in dynamic areas again, and Pokemon run around the overworld like normal. But like, you're not gonna be able to convince me that this game is a perfect evolution when we're back to not being able to catch Pokemon like PLA did. Stuff like the 2 separate versions, which is a blatant cash grab, and the special gimmick that gets used in one generation and is then forgotten forever. The battle system is back to being stale and removes the best change they made in forever, and everything is just back to the boring old way of playing it. The team dynamics are back to being a little more stale due to the removal of alphas, and the small things are gone, like running around during a battle. Even stuff like the UI in Scarlet and Violet just looks so much more soulless. But the problem for me is that it's still a step back compared to Arceus, and that's something I just can't accept as a fan who was in love with PLA and wish it got more recognition. I want to be clear one final time. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet will, by no doubt, still be good games, but they're going to be talked about forever. Pokemon Legends Arceus doesn't have that same luxury. It never got time to shine. It's something that I don't think people are going to really remember that fondly, and that's Game Freak's fault at the end of the day. So the importance of this video was to purely give it some love, because even if you think Scarlet and Violet is better, keep in mind, your game's gonna get supported for years and years and years and always remembered as the forefront of the next generation. And this was just some weird, potentially one-off game that kind of came out of nowhere. And I personally think was a more important evolution for the franchise. So therefore, it does deserve to be documented. But hey, there will probably be another Pokemon Legends game someday. You know, like Pokemon Coliseum. You know, like Pokemon Channel. You know, like... Oh no. Alright, well, this ended up being my Christmas special this year, I guess. Freaking hat in the shot. So yeah, this is kind of an improvised segment, but I think it was important to add because I recently played Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and you might be wondering, did my opinions change? Because this script was written before the game came out, when I was calling it good, when I was saying the graphics and stuff looked good. They caught me with those trailers. They looked a lot better than the actual game. So look, I like Scarlet and Violet. I think the games are good. They run horrible. It's really bad. It's actually really baffling to me how bad these games run. Performance was never the main thing of this video anyway. So I guess as a game, do I think Scarlet and Violet still are worse than PLA? And I would say by a long shot. And I am thankful for that because if I played Scarlet and Violet and ended up being like the best game ever, I would have had to consider rewriting this video or something. And maybe I'll do a video on Scarlet and Violet someday, but my point still remains the same. Like, I'm walking around the world and it's like, I just wanna like throw Pokeballs. I don't wanna, you know, go into a fight every 2 seconds. My head keeps falling off. Stay on. And graphically, I would even argue PLA might look better, to be honest. Like, the worlds in Scarlet and Violet are like geometric for some reason. Like, you'll be walking, like there's like a hill with like a, you know, a slope. So it's like, do you guys know how geometry works? I like Scarlet and Violet, but my thesis of the video still thankfully remains the same. Pokemon Legends Arceus is everything I wanted from the future of Pokemon. There's always that theory that Scarlet and Violet were made around the same time that PLA was being developed, and it's like, possible. Oh shit. But regardless, I think one thing we can all agree on is they need to stop doing these yearly releases. This is getting out of hand. I know it's not the point of this video. They can't do it. Game Freak is not the type of company who can do yearly multiple open world games. I think the generations need to go back to being 4 years, like Generation 4 and 3. And it's like, PLA could have just been the holiday title for 2022, and Scarlet and Violet could have been the holiday title for 2023. And each game could have gotten, you know, more DLC, more love and care, more development time, more Pokemon. But instead, it sticks to the fact that why was PLA released in January 2022? I think they wanted this game to fail, like low-key, or they didn't think it would do well. I think the games that are coming out are good, but they are, they don't run well. They are ugly. Very, very ugly. So yeah, this is like my bonus little conclusion. Again, this is improvised, which I don't usually do for my videos nowadays. But I just wanted to say thank you for watching me this year. YouTube was really exciting for me this year. My channel, you know, I don't want to say it like took off, but it grew a really, really big amount beyond any of my goals I had for this year. So I just want to say thank you if you stuck around this long, if you're from, you know, the old days of the channel, or you're new, welcome. I'll be back in 2023. I'll be doing another season. I'll be doing more videos just like this. Probably gonna be taking a slight winter break, possibly just January, maybe February as well, or coming back late February, just to kind of refresh myself, gather up some scripts and stuff. But in the meantime, I will be preparing for all new JeffCompass episodes. I have a whole list of them we'll be doing. We'll be coming back next year for the same type of thing. I'd like to thank everyone just one more time. If you're from the old days or you're, you know, helped me with the videos, thank you to Ninjastar for guest starring and collaborating with me on this. Thank you to Johnny in Pixel Pursuit for guest starring. It was really a big video, and I'm glad I could finish 2022 out on a bang. I hope you liked the video too. It was probably one of my more analytical ones. I'm rambling though. Have a happy Christmas, happy holidays, and I'll see you in 2023.